My name's Noah Everett. I'm 35, and until a few months ago, I thought my family was complicated but harmless. You know, the usual sibling rivalries and offhand comments that sting, but you brush off because that's just how family is. I've always been the calm one, the so-called success story everyone liked to mention at reunions, mostly because I built a charter business from scratch and, more recently, bought a yacht. Not a massive super yacht or anything, but big enough to turn heads at the marina and big enough to become the root of every ounce of tension that's been boiling under the surface of my family for years. My younger brother, Liam, is 32. He's charismatic, the type of guy who could charm a refund out of an airline agent or convince a teacher he forgot to turn in an essay he never wrote. Growing up, everyone adored him. My mom said he had golden boy energy. My dad used to laugh at his mistakes, call them learning moments. Me? I was the one expected to know better. I worked after school at the docks while Liam went to parties. When I graduated high school and skipped college to work full-time, my parents thought I was throwing my life away. When I finally started my own charter company, they said it was cute that I was playing businessman. It wasn't until my company started making real money that their tone changed, especially Liam's. The yacht was my first true indulgence. I named her the Mariner's Wish. She was sleek, white, and timeless. I'd saved for years, working 7-day weeks, managing maintenance calls at 2 a.m., doing every job from captain to janitor until I could afford a crew. When I took my parents and Liam out for the first ride, I expected it to be this proud family moment. Instead, Liam spent the entire time asking how much I paid for it, what the resale value was, and whether I really needed something this expensive for clients. My mom just smiled awkwardly and told him to stop teasing. But that wasn't teasing. That was the first crack. Things shifted slowly after that. Liam got engaged to a woman named Tessa, a social media influencer, if that word still means anything. Her entire personality seemed curated for the camera. She was photogenic, confident, and perpetually recording. Every conversation with her felt like a live stream I didn't agree to join. The first time we met, she told me my yacht would make killer wedding footage. I laughed politely, not realizing she was serious. From that day, every family interaction circled back to their wedding. They'd booked an oceanside resort, a sunset ceremony, drone shots, the works. And somehow, without my consent, the Mariner's Wish became part of the narrative. It started subtly. Liam would throw out lines like, "We'll do the rehearsal dinner on Noah's boat, right?" Or, "The guests will love the cruise after the vows." He never asked, it was always assumed. I corrected him gently the first few times, saying, "Hey, I can't promise that. The yacht's booked most weekends." But he brushed me off with that smirk I'd known since childhood, the one that always made me feel like the boring older brother ruining the fun. "Come on, man, it's my wedding. You can block one weekend for me." A few weeks later, my mom called, not to ask how I was, but to help smooth things over. Apparently, Liam had told her I was acting weird about lending him the yacht. I explained that the yacht wasn't just some toy, it was my business. If I took it out of commission for a wedding weekend, that's thousands in lost revenue. My mom sighed the way only moms can. "Honey, it's your brother's big day. He's not asking you for money, just a favor. You can't put a price tag on family memories." That sentence stuck with me for days, because that's exactly what I'd been doing for years, putting a price tag on everything, not because I was greedy, but because no one else ever understood the cost of what they asked. My time, my effort, my sanity. But I gave in a little. I said fine, they could use the yacht for some photos the day before the wedding, as long as my crew handled it. Liam agreed, too quickly. Then, about a month before the wedding, he sent me a message that still makes my jaw tighten when I think about it. It read, "Hey, bro, Tessa and I decided we'll have the ceremony on the Mariner's Wish instead. It'll be epic. Everyone's hyped. We'll start setting up Thursday." No question mark. No discussion. Just a statement of fact. When I called him, he acted surprised that I was even upset. "Dude, you're taking this too seriously. You know how much good publicity this could be for you? Half our guests have massive followings. Think of it like marketing." I told him firmly that my yacht wasn't a wedding venue and that he couldn't just set up on it. He laughed. Actually laughed. "You're joking, right? Come on, you've got plenty of money. Why are you being so stingy?" That word, stingy, cut deeper than it should have. He'd said it like my success was something I owed him, like my hard work somehow belonged to the family. For a moment, I wondered if this was about the yacht at all, or if it was about every invisible scorecard he'd been keeping since we were kids. I told him no again, and this time I didn't sugarcoat it. You can take photos on it for an hour, supervised. That's it. He hung up on me. The next week, my mom called again, voice tense. Noah, whatever you said to your brother really hurt him. He's been so stressed with wedding planning. Can't you just give him this one thing? I repeated that I couldn't. She didn't understand. She never did when it came to Liam. He could drain her savings, and she'd say he just needed a little help getting started. He could skip Christmas, and she'd say he was finding his path. Meanwhile, I'd miss one dinner because I was working, and she'd say I was becoming distant. By the time the rehearsal weekend rolled around, I decided to keep my distance. I wasn't part of the wedding party, and honestly, that was fine by me. I planned to attend quietly, congratulate them, and leave before the chaos started. The morning of the ceremony, though, I got a text from one of my employees. Hey boss, there's a team at the dock trying to load floral arrangements and equipment onto the Mariner's Wish. Said it's for a wedding. I dropped everything and drove straight to the marina. Sure enough, there were people in pastel shirts unloading boxes of decorations, speakers, even a champagne tower. And there, directing the entire operation, was Liam, wearing aviators and a smug grin. When he saw me, his smile flickered but didn't fade. Noah, perfect timing. We're almost done setting up. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. What are you doing? I asked, trying to keep my voice even. Relax, he said, brushing me off. We'll put everything back exactly how it was. You won't even notice. I told him again, calmly, firmly, that he had no permission to use the yacht, that I was this close to calling security if they didn't stop. He laughed like I was being dramatic. You'd really do that? You'd ruin your brother's wedding because you can't let him borrow a boat. That word, borrow, snapped something in me. Borrow implied I'd get it back the same way. But I knew the kind of people he was inviting. Socialites, influencers, careless drinkers. My deck would end up sticky with spilled champagne, furniture broken, crew overworked, and somehow it would all be my fault for not being fun. After I forced everyone to unload, Liam stormed off, saying I'd embarrassed him in front of his friends. He didn't talk to me again before the wedding day. I thought maybe that was the end of it, that he'd cool off, realize how insane it was to plan an unauthorized wedding at my business property, and move on. But when I arrived at the resort for the ceremony, just as the sun was dipping low, painting everything gold, I felt this heaviness in the air. People whispered when I walked in. I could see Tessa giving me a tight smile from the altar, her bridesmaids all looking like they'd been instructed to avoid me. My mom hugged me stiffly, muttering, "Please don't make a scene." That was my first sign something was about to go wrong. Because when the vows started, Liam's speech wasn't the sentimental kind. He'd prepared a show, and I was about to be the unwilling punchline in front of 200 guests, among them, a judge whose presence none of us realized would change everything that followed. And it all began with the moment he walked toward me, microphone in hand, smirking like he'd finally won. Liam stood there, microphone in hand, like some performer who'd just spotted his favorite heckler in the crowd. The guests were laughing from whatever inside joke he'd just cracked, but when his eyes locked on mine, the air shifted. It was that familiar look, the same one he'd give me when we were kids right before doing something that would get me in trouble, but earn him applause. Ladies and gentlemen, he began, grinning like he was hosting a late-night show. Before we wrap up the speeches, I just want to say a few words about my brother, Noah. There was polite applause. I nodded slightly, unsure what direction this was going. The photographer turned her lens toward me, and I could feel the spotlight, figurative and literal, hitting my face. Liam paced slowly, milking the moment. Now, if you don't know Noah, let me tell you, he's the responsible one. Always has been. Straight A student, never got grounded, worked every summer while the rest of us were just trying to have fun. The crowd chuckled softly. He kept going. And now he's a big shot with his own business, a fancy yacht, a perfect life. He's the kind of guy who makes you feel like maybe you've been doing everything wrong. More laughter. But it wasn't warm. It was the uneasy kind, the kind that comes when people don't know whether they should actually be laughing. I forced a smile. My mom looked up at me from her seat, her expression caught somewhere between pride and anxiety. I could tell she didn't like where this was going either. Liam continued, "But don't let that calm face fool you. Noah's got a stubborn streak. I asked him for a tiny favor. You know, To use his boat for a few hours, no big deal. And he said no. He turned dramatically to the audience. Can you believe that? His own brother. On my wedding day, there was a mix of laughs and awkward murmurs. Some guests leaned in, clearly uncomfortable. I wanted to stand up, to say something, but I knew that'd only make it worse. He wasn't just trying to embarrass me. He wanted a reaction. He smirked when he saw me staying quiet. Guess some people just can't stand sharing the spotlight, huh? That line landed like a dart. My chest tightened. I heard Tessa's bridesmaids giggling, her father shaking his head with an exaggerated sigh. My mom whispered something to my dad, who looked like he wanted to disappear. And then, as if that wasn't enough, Liam snapped his fingers. Two groomsmen appeared from behind the band setup, dragging something covered with a white sheet. The guests turned their heads as he dramatically unveiled it. A massive framed photo of my yacht, the Mariner's Wish, printed and propped up like a billboard. This, my friends, Liam announced, is what my brother loves more than family. The laughter hit a fever pitch. Some people clapped. Others didn't know what to do. My mother's jaw dropped. I felt my face heat up, my hands trembling under the tablecloth. I could handle jokes, but this was a public ambush. I stood up then, calmly, but firmly. That's enough, Liam. He raised his eyebrows. Oh, come on, it's just a joke. No, it's not, I said. My voice was steady, even though my pulse was hammering. You've made your point. For a brief moment, silence. Then he laughed again, dismissing me with a wave. All right, I'll stop embarrassing the rich guy. Don't want him taking his boat and sailing off on us. The guests chuckled nervously, and the DJ jumped in to play some music. I sat down again, jaw tight. My mom reached for my arm and whispered, "Please, honey, don't react. It's his day." I didn't respond, because deep down, something in me had already cracked. It wasn't just the speech, it was years of being the backup, the safety net, the one expected to swallow humiliation so no one else had to feel uncomfortable. After the ceremony ended, everyone filed into the reception hall, a sprawling glass pavilion overlooking the ocean. The decorations were stunning. Tessa's aesthetic sense was flawless, I'll give her that. But I barely noticed. Every time I looked around, I saw guests whispering, glancing my way, smirking as if I really was the selfish brother who'd refused a dying wish. I headed straight to the bar. I don't drink much, but that night I ordered something strong just to keep my hands from shaking. My dad came over after a few minutes, sighing as he leaned against the counter. He went too far, he said softly. But you know how he is. That's the problem, I muttered. Everyone knows how he is, and no one ever stops him. Dad looked at me with that weary expression I'd seen 100 times before, the one that said he wanted peace more than justice. It's his wedding, Noah. Let him have his fun. You'll forget about it in a week. I looked out across the room at Liam and Tessa, surrounded by people, laughing like nothing had happened. Yeah, I said quietly, we'll see. But forgetting was not in the cards. Because a few hours later, as the guests settled into dinner and speeches began again, I overheard something that made my blood run cold. Tessa's maid of honor was talking to one of the bridesmaids near my table, unaware that I was within earshot. Oh my God, did you hear what Liam told the planner? He said they're taking the yacht tomorrow for the after-party cruise. Can you imagine? The other woman giggled. Wait, really? I thought his brother said no. He said it's fine now, she replied, shrugging. Apparently, Noah changed his mind after the ceremony. Guess he didn't want to look bad in front of everyone. I froze. Changed my mind. I hadn't even spoken to him. My mind raced. He'd found another way to do it. Just go ahead and take the yacht, assuming I wouldn't stop him in front of all these people. When I spotted him across the room, he was already watching me. That same smug expression. He raised his glass in a mock toast, like he knew I'd overheard. That was it, the breaking point. I got up and walked straight toward him. The chatter in the room dimmed a little as people noticed. We need to talk, I said, voice low. He smiled. About what? Oh, right, the boat. Don't worry, we'll take good care of it. You're not taking it, I said firmly. Not tomorrow. Not ever, without permission. He leaned in, still smiling, but his eyes sharp. You're really going to do this here? In front of everyone? You think that makes you look good? I don't care how it looks, I said. I care about boundaries. Boundaries, he repeated, laughing like it was the funniest word he'd ever heard. Noah, you've got everything. A business, a boat, money pouring in. All I wanted was one weekend. You can't even do that? You know what? Maybe Mom's right. You've changed. My mother, now standing nearby, said softly, Liam, please. But he cut her off. No, Mom, he needs to hear this. He acts like he's above everyone now. Like we're all supposed to thank him for existing. People were turning their heads now, conversations dying down. Even the band stopped playing. I kept my voice calm, even though my insides were shaking. I've worked for everything I have. You don't get to take it because you think you're owed something. He stepped closer, lowering his voice, but not enough that the people nearest us couldn't hear. You think you're better than me. You always have. I never thought that, I said. But maybe I should have. That did it. His smile vanished. In an instant, his hand shot out. Before I could react, the slap landed hard across my face. The sound echoed louder than the music had moments ago. For a moment, nobody moved. Glasses froze midair, forks hung over plates. I felt the sting spreading across my cheek, but the pain barely registered. It was the shock, the humiliation that hit first. Then came the murmurs. Gasps. Someone said, "Oh my God." My mother shouted his name. Liam. But he just stood there, breathing heavily, eyes wild. You deserve that, he hissed. You've been embarrassing me all week. I didn't speak. I just stared at him. Something in me went cold, quiet. Before I could respond, an older man from one of the front tables stood up. I'd seen him earlier, sitting with a group of local officials. A family friend of Tessa's father, I thought. But now, the look on his face was firm, commanding. That's enough, he said. His voice carried across the room with authority. You've crossed a line. The crowd parted slightly as he approached us. I saw Tessa's face pale. Her father rushed over too, whispering something frantic. The man turned to me, extending his hand. Mr. Everett, are you all right? I'm fine, I said automatically, though my cheek burned red. The man looked around the room, his tone shifting. For anyone wondering, I'm Judge Harold Miller. And what I just witnessed was assault, plain and simple. The air sucked out of the room. Liam blinked, his confidence draining. Oh, come on, he stammered. It was just, the judge raised a hand. Not another word. You can humiliate your brother all you like, but laying a hand on him in front of witnesses? That's something else entirely. Tessa looked like she wanted to sink into the floor. My mom covered her mouth. The guests were silent. And me? I just stood there, pulse steady now, watching Liam's face crumble as he realized, for the first time in his life, that charm wouldn't save him this time. That moment, the collective silence, the judgmental stares, the weight of every suppressed emotion finally breaking through. That's when everything truly changed. Because what happened after that wasn't just fallout. It was the start of something I never thought I'd do, something I'd spent years avoiding, standing up, not just for myself, but for the principle I'd been forced to swallow my whole life. The night of Liam's wedding ended in chaos. After the judge's words, everything crumbled in slow motion. The DJ froze mid-song. Guests whispered like they'd witnessed something forbidden, and Tessa's perfect aesthetic, candles flickering, champagne glasses glinting, suddenly looked like the set of a crime scene. My cheeks still throbbed from the slap, but it was the humiliation that burned deeper. I could feel every stare, every camera phone, every gasp echoing in my skull. My mother cried quietly near the buffet table. My father stood between me and Liam like a man trying to hold back a storm with his bare hands. Tessa was whispering furiously to her new husband, her manicured hand gripping his sleeve as if she could physically pull him back into composure. But Liam, red-faced and trembling, looked more like a boy caught stealing cookies than a groom. He mumbled something like, "It was a joke," or "He provoked me," but no one cared anymore. The judge's voice had sliced through all his excuses. I didn't say another word. I just turned and walked out. Outside, the air was thick with salt and humidity. I could hear the ocean beyond the resort's manicured lawn, the rhythmic crash of waves somehow mocking the noise behind me. I stood there for a minute, my hand pressed against the side of my face, trying to steady my breathing. For years, I'd been the one to avoid scenes, to keep peace, even when I was the only one bleeding for it. But now the world had seen it. The slap, the imbalance, the truth. A few people followed me out, mostly out of concern, or maybe curiosity. One of my employees, Mark, had been invited since he handled our charter logistics. He came up quietly, offered me his jacket, and said, "You handled that better than anyone could have." I gave him a small nod. Thanks, Mark. Just make sure no one touches the yacht tomorrow, okay? He understood immediately. That night, I didn't go home. I drove down to the marina, parked by the Mariner's Wish, and sat in silence for hours. The deck lights reflected on the dark water, calm and perfect, completely untouched by the storm I'd just left behind. I climbed aboard and sat by the wheel, feeling the hum of the generator through the floorboards. The yacht had always been my symbol of freedom, my escape. But in that moment, it felt like the only place I had left. The next morning, I woke up to dozens of messages. Some from family, some from friends, a few from people I barely knew who had seen clips circulating online. Yes, someone had filmed it. Of course they had. The wedding slap was already making rounds on social media, though thankfully not viral enough to hit the news cycle. Still, it was humiliating to know strangers were watching that moment like a scene from a reality show. Liam texted me once. Just once. We need to talk. You made me look bad. I stared at the message for a long time before deleting it. He still didn't get it. For the next few weeks, I kept to myself. My mom tried calling daily at first, her tone a mix of guilt and denial. You know your brother didn't mean it, she said once. He's under so much pressure. I told her, calmly, that what he did wasn't about pressure, it was about entitlement. She sighed, said she didn't want to take sides, and hung up. My dad, on the other hand, didn't call at all. Not for almost a month. When he finally did, his voice was weary. Your mother's upset, he said. She thinks the family's falling apart. I replied, it's been falling apart for years. It just finally hit the floor. Business was the only thing that kept me grounded. My company had always been steady, but after the wedding fiasco, something changed in me. I started working harder, not out of anger, but clarity. The distraction helped, sure, but it also reminded me why I'd built this life. Every early morning, every sleepless night, every dollar saved, it had all been mine. Not handed down, not borrowed. Mine. A few clients had heard about the wedding incident and reached out with sympathy. One, an older woman who owned a real estate firm, said something that stuck with me. You learn who your family is the day they realize they can't control you. That sentence echoed in my head for weeks. I focused on rebuilding, not my reputation, but my peace. I upgraded my yacht's booking system, expanded routes, and hired 2 new crew members. Mark took on more responsibility, proving himself reliable beyond expectation. By summer, we were booked months in advance. Ironically, the same social circle that once whispered about me now wanted to host parties on my yacht. I declined most of them. I wasn't ready to let people like that back into my space. As for Liam and Tessa, they went quiet. I heard bits and pieces through my mother. Their honeymoon got postponed because of stress, which was her delicate way of saying they were fighting. My father hinted that Tessa's parents weren't happy with the scene at the wedding. Apparently, the judge, Harold Miller, had pulled Tessa's father aside afterward and strongly advised that Liam get professional help for his anger issues before there were more serious consequences. At first, I thought that would be enough. That maybe, finally, Liam would take a step back and realize he'd gone too far. But that's not how people like him work. When entitlement meets embarrassment, it doesn't evolve, it festers. A few months later, I got served papers. He was suing me. The claim was absurd: defamation and business damages. According to the filing, my refusal to honor an agreed-upon arrangement for the yacht had caused him to suffer emotional distress and public embarrassment. He even claimed the judge's public reprimand had damaged his professional reputation. For the record, Liam didn't have much of a profession beyond occasional real estate stints and influencer partnerships through Tessa. When I read the documents, I actually laughed. Not because it was funny, but because it was so perfectly Liam. When he couldn't get what he wanted through charm or guilt, he tried force. I hired a lawyer, of course, a good one. And during that process, I learned something important. Sometimes the worst betrayals can become your sharpest clarity. The lawsuit wasn't just petty, it was self-destructive. Every piece of evidence his attorney tried to use crumbled under basic scrutiny. There were witnesses, hundreds of them, who saw the slap. There were videos. There was even Judge Miller's statement, should it come to that. But while the case was being processed, my mother's calls took on a new tone. Can't you just settle? She pleaded. He's your brother. He stopped being just my brother when he slapped me in front of 200 people, I said quietly. And when he tried to take what I built. She didn't answer. The months dragged on. The legal process was slow, but my company thrived. For the first time, I started traveling for myself. No clients, no family obligations. Just me. I spent a week sailing along the Croatian coast, anchoring at small islands where no one knew who I was. The sun, the quiet, the solitude, it was healing. During one of those evenings, anchored near a tiny village, I sat on deck watching the horizon bleed orange into purple. I realized something simple but powerful. I didn't know anyone an explanation for my boundaries. The guilt I'd carried for years. Every time I said no, every time I didn't play the role of responsible big brother, it wasn't mine to bear. By the time I returned home, I was different. Not harder exactly, just less willing to shrink. The court eventually dismissed Liam's case. Frivolous and baseless, the judge said. The same Judge Miller, in fact, who had witnessed the incident firsthand. When the verdict came through, my lawyer smiled and said, "He picked the wrong brother to provoke." But even in victory, the aftermath hurt. My mom didn't celebrate. She cried, said things like, "Families shouldn't fight in court." My dad stayed neutral as always. And Liam, well, he vanished from family gatherings. Rumor was, he and Tessa had separated temporarily. Apparently, she'd grown tired of his bad press. Still, I didn't gloat. I didn't post about it, didn't talk about it. I just went back to my life, quietly, deliberately. The silence was its own kind of peace. It took nearly a year for my parents to truly understand the depth of what had happened. My mom came to visit one afternoon, unannounced. She stood on my dock, looking small against the backdrop of the yacht. "I didn't realize," she said finally. "I kept thinking it would all blow over. But you were right. We let him get away with too much." I nodded. "You wanted to protect him." "I wanted to protect both of you," she said softly. "But I didn't see what it was costing you." It was the first real apology I'd heard from anyone in my family. And maybe that was enough for now. Over time, things settled. My business expanded into a second yacht, then a third. I started hosting charity sales for underprivileged kids, something I'd always wanted to do but never had time for. Each time I watched those kids' faces light up on the open sea, I remembered why I loved this work in the first place. It wasn't about the money or the luxury. It was about freedom, purpose, and the sense that I'd built something meaningful. Then, one evening about 18 months after the wedding, I got a call from an unfamiliar number. When I picked up, the voice on the other end froze me in place. It was Liam. His tone wasn't angry this time. It was tired, almost desperate. "Hey, Noah," he said quietly. "We need to talk. It's about Mom and Dad." And just like that, the peace I'd worked so hard for began to ripple again. When I heard Liam's voice on the phone that night, it was like hearing a ghost. 18 months of silence. And suddenly, he was calling as if nothing had happened. My first instinct was to hang up. But something in his tone, tired, almost hollow, made me pause. "What about Mom and Dad?" I asked cautiously. He hesitated. "They're not doing great. Financially, I mean. Dad's business took a hit after one of his partners backed out, and Mom had to cover some of his debts. They're behind on the mortgage." I leaned back in my chair, the faint hum of the marina outside my window filling the silence. "And you're telling me this because?" "Because I'm helping them as much as I can," he said quickly, "but I can't cover everything alone." I thought maybe you could, there it was. The real reason. Not reconciliation. Not guilt. Just another favor wrapped in family guilt. "I've already helped them before," I said flatly. "They never told me about any of this." "They didn't want to bother you," he replied, and there was a flicker of irritation in his voice, the same tone he used when things didn't go his way. "Look, Noah, I know we've had our differences, but they need help. You've got the means." "Liam," I said quietly, "you sued me." He went silent. The weight of that truth hung between us. Finally, he said, "I made a mistake, okay? I was angry. I thought you were trying to humiliate me. But I've changed." I didn't believe that for a second, but I also knew better than to argue. "I'll think about it," I said, and hung up. For the first time in years, I didn't feel angry. I felt curious. Something about the timing, the sudden appeal to emotion, didn't sit right. So the next day, I drove to my parents' house. The neighborhood was quieter than I remembered. Their garden, once perfectly maintained by my mom, was overgrown. My dad's car had a "for sale" sign on the windshield. When I knocked, my mom opened the door looking thinner, older, but still warm in that familiar, conflicted way. "Noah," she said softly, as if she wasn't sure she was allowed to say my name. Inside, Dad was at the dining table surrounded by papers. He gave me a tired smile. I was hoping you'd stop by. We talked for hours. About his business, about the economy, about how he'd trusted a longtime partner who pulled out last minute, leaving him with debt he couldn't shoulder. They'd been scraping by, avoiding telling me because you had enough on your plate. I believed them, but something still didn't add up. When I asked how much they owed, Dad said a number that made my stomach twist, not because it was too high, but because it was oddly specific. It matched, almost exactly, the cost of the yacht Liam had once tried to use for his wedding. That night, after I left, I stopped by a quiet cafe near the harbor and pulled out my laptop. A few quick searches confirmed my suspicion. A month earlier, Liam had tried and failed to start a luxury event company. His name was still attached to a series of unpaid invoices, and his investors had reportedly backed out after some bad publicity. It clicked all at once. He wasn't just trying to help my parents. He was using them as leverage. That realization didn't make me angry. It made me focused. I knew Liam well enough to predict his moves. He'd try to guilt me into giving him money for the family, then redirect it into his own failing venture. He'd twist it into a story about helping everyone. He always needed to be the hero, and heroes like him always built their image on someone else's back. So, I decided to give him what he wanted on my terms. Over the next few days, I quietly gathered information. I spoke to Dad's former business partner, to a few mutual contacts who'd worked with Liam, and to Mark, my right-hand man at the marina. By the end of the week, I had a clear picture. Liam's company had gone under. He'd borrowed heavily to make it look successful, betting that his name and connections would attract investors. When that failed, he turned to the only thing that had ever saved him before: family. But this time, he'd picked the wrong version of me. The old me would have written a check just to make the tension disappear. But the new me, the one forged from humiliation and rebuilding, wanted something else. I wanted to show him what accountability looked like. I began laying the groundwork. Step 1. I called my parents and told them I'd help pay off their mortgage, directly, through the bank, not through Liam. My mom protested at first, saying it would hurt his feelings. I told her gently, it's not about his feelings. It's about doing this right. She didn't argue after that. Step 2. I invited Liam to meet in person. I made it sound like a truce. We met at a waterfront restaurant downtown. He showed up in designer sunglasses, all smiles, as if none of the past year had happened. "Man, you look good," he said, clapping me on the shoulder. "Glad we can finally talk like adults." I gave him a polite nod. Same here. Over dinner, he played his role perfectly: concerned brother, responsible son, misunderstood victim. He talked about helping mom and dad, about how he'd been humbled and was finally focusing on doing the right thing. It was an impressive performance. Then he said it. The real pitch. "I've been thinking," he began, swirling his wine. "You and I could actually work together. Combine our resources. I've got contacts in the events world, and you've got the boats. We could run luxury wedding charters. Make a fortune." There it was, the hook. I hid my satisfaction behind a thoughtful expression. "That's an interesting idea," I said. "How about you send me a proposal? Something on paper." He grinned. "I knew you'd see it." After that night, I didn't hear from him for 2 weeks. Then, sure enough, he sent a long, detailed business plan. It was slick, professional looking, even had fake projections showing projected annual revenue and mutual equity. But buried in the fine print was exactly what I expected: a clause giving him 51% ownership of the company for management purposes. That was all I needed. I printed every page, highlighted every inconsistency, and forwarded it to my lawyer, along with the previous lawsuit documents, copies of his unpaid debts, and records of his recent company shutdown. "Prepare a contingency file," I told her. "I don't plan to use it yet, but I want it ready." The next part of my plan wasn't legal, it was psychological. I wanted him to feel like everything was going his way, just long enough to build confidence. So I agreed to his proposal in principle. We met twice more, discussing logistics, pricing models, even branding. He bragged to everyone, including my parents, that we were rebuilding the Everett legacy. I let him. In fact, I even told my marketing assistant to design mock-ups of the company's new brand, Everett Luxury Charters. I made sure Liam's name was on the early drafts, just so he'd feel like it was real. He started posting about it online, calling it a new beginning. The post got traction. Investors started sniffing around again. He had no idea the trap was already closing. Meanwhile, I had been quietly setting up an entirely separate venture under my company's existing structure. A genuine expansion, real boats, real clients, real contracts. It shared almost the same branding as the fake one Liam thought he controlled. When the time came, the confusion between the two names would be enough to expose just how messy his operation really was. But that was only part of it. The final piece was something I'd been planning since the day he slapped me, something poetic. There was a high-profile charity gala coming up, hosted by several of my company's biggest clients. I'd been invited to sponsor the event, and I knew Liam was attending too. Through Tessa, who'd been clawing her way back into influencer circles after their split and reunion. The theme? Family, integrity, and redemption. I couldn't have scripted it better. That night would be my stage. Not for revenge in the cruel sense, but for something far more satisfying, for truth, for exposure, and for the calm, deliberate reckoning he'd never see coming. Because while he'd spent the past year chasing appearances, I'd been rebuilding something real, my life, my business, my peace. And now, for the first time, I wasn't reacting to him. I was leading. And as I stood on my yacht the evening before the gala, watching the reflection of city lights ripple across the water, I realized something almost funny. Revenge didn't feel like rage anymore. It felt like justice, dressed in patience. I smiled to myself, adjusted my cufflinks, and whispered into the night, "Tomorrow, little brother, you finally get what you asked for." The night of the charity gala shimmered with polished perfection, crystal chandeliers, velvet suits, and the faint sound of live jazz floating through the ballroom. It was one of those events where everyone smiled too much and no one said what they meant. I'd been to plenty before, but this one felt different. It wasn't just another night of networking or fundraising. It was the night everything came full circle. I arrived early, as I always do, calm and collected. My company's name was proudly displayed on the sponsor board, Everett Marine Enterprises, positioned directly beside the gala's banner: family, integrity, and redemption. The irony almost made me laugh out loud. Liam arrived about 30 minutes later. I spotted him across the room, all charm and confidence, shaking hands and laughing too loudly. He looked exactly how he always did before a crash, untouchable, invincible, oblivious. Tessa trailed behind him in a glittering silver dress, her expression carefully neutral. I doubted she knew what was coming, but judging by the distance between them, their reunion was already showing cracks. He saw me before I could approach. His grin widened. "Noah, there he is, my brilliant partner." A few nearby guests turned their heads at that. I smiled politely, letting him take the bait. "Good evening, Liam," I said, offering a handshake I didn't mean. "Everything's coming together nicely, I see." "Absolutely," he said, beaming. "This event's crawling with investors. I've already spoken to 2 who want to get in early on Everett luxury charters. Told you this idea had legs." "Yes," I said, keeping my voice steady. "It certainly does." He had no clue that the name he'd been using, the one he'd been promoting online, the one splashed across his marketing posts, had been legally trademarked by me weeks ago. Nor did he know that every potential investor he'd contacted had already received quiet updates from my office clarifying the real ownership of the brand. This night wasn't about humiliating him in the same way he'd done to me, not in front of 200 people with a slap. My revenge was quieter, sharper, and infinitely more permanent. As the evening went on, speeches began. The gala's host, a local philanthropist, gave the usual talk about community and values. Then came the donor acknowledgments. When my name was announced, I stood, gave a polite nod, and prepared for the next step. But first, Liam had to make his move. He'd arranged, apparently, to take the stage later in the night. A surprise announcement, he'd told people. I knew exactly what it was. He was going to reveal our new business partnership to the audience, riding on my credibility to resurrect his name. The timing was perfect, right after dessert, when everyone's guard was down and champagne was flowing. I didn't stop him. When the MC called his name, Liam strode to the podium like he was walking onto a movie set. The lights caught him perfectly. The room went quiet. "Good evening, everyone," he began, all smooth confidence. "Tonight isn't just about charity, it's about rebirth. About second chances." I had to admit, he was good. His voice was steady, his delivery flawless. If I didn't know better, I'd believe him myself. He went on for a few minutes, talking about family values, collaboration, and the importance of forgiveness. Then he hit the crescendo. "I'm proud to announce," he said, gesturing toward me, "a brand new venture, Everett Luxury Charters, a partnership between my brother Noah and myself. A fusion of vision, craftsmanship, and heart." There was applause. Cameras flashed. Investors smiled approvingly. He was in his element again, adored, admired, untouchable. Until the host spoke up. "Ah, yes," the host said, smiling politely. "That's quite an announcement, Mr. Everett. And a perfect segue, actually, into our next scheduled presentation from Mr. Noah Everett himself, who's here to tell us about his company's expansion plans." The applause faded slightly, replaced with a subtle buzz of curiosity. Liam froze for half a second, unsure whether to step aside or stay. I walked toward the stage slowly, the sound of my footsteps echoing across the marble. When I reached the podium, I gave my brother a calm, measured look, the kind that only someone with complete control can give. "Thank you, Liam," I said, my voice steady through the microphone. "It's always nice to see your enthusiasm. But I should clarify something important before any misunderstandings spread." The audience hushed. Cameras stayed fixed on us. Liam's smile faltered just a little. I turned to the crowd. "My company, Everett Marine Enterprises, has indeed been expanding, but not with outside partners." I paused, letting that sink in. "We recently launched Everett Charter Group, a registered and trademarked division under our umbrella, focused on high-end yacht experiences and maritime events. I've heard there's been some confusion regarding similar names floating around." I turned slightly toward Liam, my tone still friendly but deliberate. "Just to be perfectly clear, any use of the term Everett Luxury Charters is unauthorized. My legal team is already handling the matter." A wave of whispers rippled through the audience. Liam's color drained. He stepped closer, lowering his voice, but the mic caught it anyway. "What are you doing?" I didn't look at him. "Correcting misinformation," I said, still addressing the crowd. I went on to thank the gala organizers, outline my company's real charity initiatives, including the free sailing programs for underprivileged kids, and ended with a brief statement about integrity in business. By the time I stepped away, the applause was thunderous, polite, and unmistakably pointed. Liam stood there frozen, microphone in hand, unsure what to say. Tessa looked mortified. One of the investors he'd been charming earlier quietly slipped away from their table. He tried to recover, mumbling something about a misunderstanding, but the damage was already done. The host quickly moved on to the next segment, and the band started playing. For the first time in years, Liam didn't look like the golden boy. He looked small. After the event, he followed me out into the hallway, his face red and voice shaking. "You set me up." I turned slowly. "No, Liam. I gave you a chance to be honest. You just couldn't take it." He clenched his fists, but didn't move closer. "You made me look like a fool." "You did that yourself," I said quietly. "You used Mom and Dad, lied about helping them, tried to scam investors under my name. I just told the truth." He stared at me, breathing hard, eyes darting like he was searching for a foothold. "You think you're better than me." I took a step closer, calm as ever. "No, I think I finally stopped pretending we're the same." For a moment, I thought he might hit me again. But instead, he turned and stormed off, shoving through the exit doors into the cold night. The fallout came fast. Within days, word spread that his company had been a sham. Investors demanded refunds, vendors filed complaints, and one of his old creditors reopened a claim. My lawyer quietly forwarded the documentation to assist the authorities with their investigation. As for my parents, they were shaken but grateful. My dad, embarrassed by how easily he'd been manipulated again, told me, "You did what I never could, son. You stopped protecting him from himself." In the weeks that followed, I didn't see or hear from Liam. Tessa left him for good, moving out of their condo and back into her parents' estate. I heard through the grapevine that he'd left town, supposedly to start fresh. Maybe he did. Maybe he didn't. Either way, it wasn't my concern anymore. My focus was where it always should have been, forward. My business continued to grow. The charity division took off, attracting real attention and good press. I even started mentoring young entrepreneurs at the marina, teaching them what I wish someone had told me years ago. that success doesn't require anyone's approval, just persistence and self-respect. One afternoon, a few months later, I took the mariner's wish out alone. The water was glass smooth, sunlight stretching across it like liquid gold. For the first time in a long time, I felt something close to peace. As the yacht cut through the waves, I thought about everything: the slap, the lawsuit, the humiliation, the slow, careful rebuilding. Every ounce of pain had led to this moment of stillness. In the distance, the horizon blurred into the sky, endless, open, mine. And for the first time in years, I smiled, not out of pride, not out of victory, but because I finally understood the simplest truth of all: revenge doesn't come from anger. It comes from freedom. And I had never felt freer. I was 29 the year everything changed, but the story doesn't start there. It starts much earlier, back when I was just the family disappointment. My name's Eric, and if you ask my mom, she'd probably still tell you I never quite figured things out. That was her way of saying I didn't follow the family blueprint. My older brother, Brian, went to law school like Dad always wanted. My cousin Amber married a real estate developer and popped out 3 kids before 30. Me? I dropped out of college at 21, moved to a 1-bedroom apartment above a laundromat, and started tinkering with code while delivering food to stay afloat. To them, that was failure. To me, it was freedom. Growing up, I was the quiet one. I never really fit into the loud, overachieving chaos that was my family. Thanksgiving dinners were like corporate networking events with mashed potatoes. Everyone was either pitching some new business or bragging about their latest career milestone. I remember one year, maybe 2018, my Aunt Sharon announced her daughter had made partner at a Manhattan firm. The applause lasted a full minute. Then it was my turn. I had just launched my 3rd app and was getting decent traction. But the moment I opened my mouth, someone, I think my cousin Taylor, made a joke about me still living off ramen and a dream. Everyone laughed. Even my mom gave a tight smile and whispered, "You should have stayed in school." That's kind of how it always went. I was tolerated at best, humored at worst. Never invited to speak at weddings, never asked to be a godparent, rarely remembered on birthdays. I didn't make a scene about it. I just slowly started stepping back. First, I skipped Easter. Then it was 4th of July. Eventually, I stopped getting invited altogether. Apparently, if you don't show up, don't expect an invite, became the new family motto. The last wedding I went to, Brian's, was the tipping point for me. During his best man speech, one of his college buddies made a crack about how Brian was the successful son, and thank God he didn't end up coding in his pajamas. I felt my stomach drop. Everyone turned to look at me and laughed. Even my dad. My own dad. I left before the cake was served. Nobody called to ask why. To be fair, I wasn't doing too hot back then. The app one was working on had flopped. My startup had lost its only investor, and I was bouncing between freelance gigs just to cover rent. But something about that night, sitting in my rusted Civic, watching raindrops race down the windshield while inside they toasted to my brother's perfect life, ignited something in me. I made a quiet promise that I wouldn't show my face again until I had something real. Not just an idea or a pitch or a hope, but something they couldn't laugh off. So I disappeared. Not in the literal sense, but in the way that makes people forget you ever mattered. I stopped checking the family group chat. I muted every birthday reminder. I moved to a different city, got a new number, and poured myself into work. I rented a tiny office space with no windows and lived off microwaved lentils and bad coffee. Days blurred into nights, and I barely saw anyone who wasn't involved in my startup. I made mistakes, tons of them, but I also learned. Learned how to hire, how to scale, how to talk to investors without sounding desperate. I failed more times than I can count, but each failure sharpened me. By the time I turned 27, I had launched a product that actually stuck. It wasn't flashy, just a back-end optimization tool for e-commerce platforms, but it worked, and people were willing to pay for it. A lot of people. I still remember the day we closed our series of funding. $18 million at a $90 million valuation. I didn't tell anyone in my family. Not a word. The thing about money is it doesn't change you as much as it exposes what you've been hiding. I didn't buy a mansion or a sports car. I kept living small. I invested smart, took on a few quiet partners, and let the product grow. The number in my bank account ballooned while my contact with my family remained non-existent. I told myself it didn't matter, that I didn't care, that I'd made peace with the fact that they'd never really seen me. But then last year, around early December, I got a call from my cousin Hannah, the only one who'd ever treated me like a human being. She was hosting Christmas that year and said she missed me, said everyone had been wondering how I was, that maybe it was time to come home for the holidays. I almost said no. I had every reason to. But something about her voice, it cracked a little when she said, "It's not the same without you." So I agreed. Told her I'd think about it. Then I booked a flight, pulled my one decent blazer from the back of the closet, and decided I'd show up. Not to flaunt, not to prove anything, just to see how it would feel to stand in that room again, to eat overcooked turkey and pretend like we were all one big happy family. Spoiler, I shouldn't have expected anything different. When I walked through the door on Christmas Eve, the first thing I saw was my mom blinking like she couldn't believe it was me. "Eric," she said, blinking. "You actually came?" Before I could respond, Brian walked by, drink in hand, and said, "Wow, who let the underachiever in?" They laughed. Again, just like they always had. I smiled and said nothing. I wasn't going to start anything. But that was the moment I knew nothing had changed. To them, I was still the joke. Still the failed startup guy. Still the family embarrassment. What they didn't know, what none of them knew, was that in the past 2 years, I'd sold my company to a private equity firm for just north of $140 million. I'd stayed on as a strategic advisor. I had equity in 3 other companies. I had a beach house I never visited and a portfolio that could buy this entire house twice over. But sure, let's keep pretending I'm the disappointment. Dinner was chaos, as always. Kids running around, uncles shouting over each other, the same stories recycled like bad sitcom reruns. I mostly kept quiet, sipped my wine, and nodded at the appropriate moments. Every now and then someone would ask what I'd been up to, but it always came with that same sarcastic tone, like they were bracing for another sob story. I just said, "Working," and left it at that. Then dessert rolled around. We were seated at the big table, the one reserved for adults, and the conversation shifted to real estate. Brian was bragging about the new investment property he'd picked up in Florida. My mom gushed about how proud she was. My uncle asked how I was doing. I said fine. He smirked. Still chasing the dream? I don't know what came over me. Maybe it was the wine. Maybe it was years of holding my tongue. But I just smiled, set down my fork, and said casually, "It's going well. I cashed out earlier this year. Sold the company." My mom blinked. "Oh, that little app thing." "Yeah," I said. "Got a decent deal. Walked away with about $140 million. There was a silence so thick you could cut it with a butter knife. Then my uncle dropped his fork. My mom looked at me, eyes wide. "You're joking." I looked her dead in the eye and said, "I'm not." And that's where everything started to shift. You could feel it, like a storm cloud had rolled in and sucked the oxygen out of the room. The same people who had laughed at me, ignored me, forgotten I existed, suddenly couldn't look away. But that's not the part that gets interesting. What happened next, what they said, what they asked, how quickly they turned. That's where the real story begins. My mom stared at me like I'd spoken in another language. Her fork hovered in midair, a sliver of cherry pie dangling off the edge. Everyone else had gone completely silent. The clinking of silverware, the background murmur of the kids at the smaller table, the hum of Christmas music from the Bluetooth speaker. It all just stopped. Brian chuckled first. A short, disbelieving laugh, like I'd made some elaborate joke no one else got. "Okay, come on," he said, grinning around the table. "What? Did you win the lottery?" "No lottery," I said, still calm, still measured. "Built something. Sold it." I didn't elaborate. I didn't need to. My uncle, still wide-eyed, leaned in. "Wait, you're serious?" I nodded. And then the questions started. Rapid fire. Chaotic. "What kind of company was it again? You sold it for how much? Wait, what do you even do? Did you have partners? Is it in the news? Can we look it up?" My mom hadn't said a word yet. Her hand was now trembling slightly as she set her fork down. Then she finally asked, quietly, "And you didn't tell us?" That was rich. I kept my voice even. "You didn't really ask." She flinched a little at that. But then, as if regrouping, she narrowed her eyes and said, "Well, we've always cared. We've always wanted to know how you were doing." Brian laughed again, sharper this time. "Sure. That's why we invite him to every single family gathering, right?" "Brian," Hannah said, shooting him a look. But he wasn't done. "Come on. Eric ghosts the family for 3 years, doesn't show up to anyone's wedding, never replies to texts, and now he wants a pat on the back because he made some cash. And there it was. I felt the heat rising to my face, but I kept my tone flat. I didn't come here for a pat on the back. Then why now? Brian pressed, raising his voice. Why show up after all this time, just to drop that number on the table like some flex? You think we're all gonna kiss your feet now? I came because Hannah asked me to, I said simply. I didn't plan to say anything. You brought it up. He leaned back in his chair and scoffed. Right. No one defended me. Not my mom. Not my dad. Not any of the aunts or uncles who used to pinch my cheeks and say I was such a smart little boy. The same people who'd laughed at every failed attempt I'd made in my 20s now didn't know what to do with me. And that would have been fine. Awkward, uncomfortable, but manageable, if that had been the end of it. But it wasn't. Later that evening, while most of the family moved to the living room to open presents and watch Home Alone for the 1000th time, my mom pulled me aside into the kitchen. Her tone was low and tight, her smile forced. Eric, she said, you know I'm proud of you. I really am. I always knew you'd land on your feet. I raised an eyebrow. Did you? She didn't answer that. Instead, she looked around to make sure no one was within earshot, then leaned in a little closer. Listen, I hate to ask this. I really do. But your cousin Taylor's going through a rough patch. Her husband got laid off. They might lose the house. I knew where this was going. She's too proud to say anything. But if there's anything you can do, just to help them get through the next few months. I paused. Not because I didn't want to help, but because of what she hadn't said. No apology. No acknowledgement of the years I was ignored. No recognition of the jokes or the absence of invitations. Just this. You have money. They need money. Fix it. I'll think about it, I said. Her face tightened, just slightly. Eric, it would really mean a lot to the family. I said I'd think about it. She gave me a cool smile, like I'd said the wrong thing. Then she turned and walked away. That was the first crack. Over the next week, things got weirder. I flew back to my apartment, a sleek, minimal penthouse I'd never posted online, and tried to move on. But suddenly I was getting calls from people I hadn't heard from in years. My cousin Amber sent a long message about how we'd grown apart, but she'd love to reconnect. My uncle emailed me a pitch deck for a real estate startup he wanted to get off the ground. Brian, of all people, texted me to say we should grab a beer soon. Just like old times. I didn't respond to any of them. Except for Hannah. She sent a short message. Hey, sorry about Christmas. That wasn't cool. I'm glad you came. I told her I appreciated that. A few days later, I got a call from my dad. That was unusual. He rarely reached out. Even growing up, he was more of a presence than a participant. At every school recital or baseball game, he'd be the one with arms crossed, checking his watch. When I dropped out of college, he didn't yell. He just said, "You'll regret this," and went back to reading the paper. So when he called, I expected something serious. Eric, he said, his voice gruff but oddly formal. Your mother told me what you said at dinner. Here we go. She also mentioned you didn't offer to help your cousin. I closed my eyes and leaned back in my chair. Dad, you've done well. I'm glad. But being successful means stepping up when your family needs you. Where was that energy when I needed help? I asked. When I was struggling to make rent. When I was in the hospital with stress migraines and couldn't afford medication. There was a pause. That was different. How? You were chasing a fantasy. No, I said, voice firm. I was building something. And you all made sure I knew just how little you believed in me. Another silence. Then, in a low voice, he said, it's not about the past. It's about now. I hung up. And that's when I realized something. They didn't actually care that I'd succeeded. They only cared that I'd succeeded without them. I tried to let it go. I tried to keep my distance. But they didn't make it easy. A week later, I got a notification that someone had tried to access my old Facebook account. Then I started getting tagged in vague posts by family members. Things like, money changes people, or funny how some folks forget who was there for them when they were nothing. I blocked them. Then, the final straw. One afternoon, Hannah called me, frantic. She'd just left a brunch with our Aunt Sharon and a few cousins. Apparently, the family was planning something behind my back. They're going to host a family intervention, she said. They want to talk some sense into you. About what? About your attitude. Your ego. The fact that you're too good for everyone now. Sharon literally said, he needs to be reminded where he came from. I stared at the wall, heart thudding. You're kidding. I wish I was. They're planning it next month. Uncle Rob offered his lake house. They think if they get you isolated, they can pressure you into helping the family. I couldn't believe it. No, I could believe it. That's what made it worse. After everything, after all the years I'd been cast out, mocked, ignored, now they wanted to pull me back and just to squeeze me dry. That's when something in me snapped. Not in a dramatic way, not with shouting or rage, but in a cold, calculated click of finality. I told Hannah, "Thanks for the heads up. What are you going to do?" I didn't answer right away. I was already planning. Because if they wanted to remind me where I came from, then maybe it was time I reminded them who they had made me become. I didn't sleep much after that call with Hannah. I laid in bed, staring at the ceiling, my chest buzzing with a strange mix of anger and clarity. You'd think that after cashing out at $140 million, the opinions of a few relatives wouldn't matter. But the truth is, family wounds don't heal with money. If anything, wealth makes the scars easier to see. The silence at dinner tables, the eye rolls, the whispered jokes. They weren't memories anymore. They were weights, pulling me down even in the highest moments of my life. The thing that hurt the most? It wasn't the betrayal. It wasn't the greed or the gossip or the fake apologies wrapped in manipulation. It was how quickly they shifted roles the second they thought I was worth something again. No remorse, no reflection, just opportunism. I wasn't a person to them. I was a bank. For the next week, I barely left my place. Not because I was hiding, just because I didn't want to pretend anymore. I canceled a meeting with a potential partner. I turned down a dinner invite from a VC friend. I even left a few emails unanswered. I just needed to sit with everything. Let the fog settle. I kept replaying things in my head. The wedding toast where Brian made me the punchline. The Christmas when I wasn't even invited. The year I was recovering from burnout, completely alone, and no one checked in. Not once. Not even my mom. Especially not my mom. I realized something that week. Something I'd avoided facing for years. I had spent so much of my life trying to prove myself to people who had already decided I wasn't worth the effort. Every new app, every business pitch, every overnight grind session, it was always secretly for them. For their approval. For that moment when they'd finally say, "You made it, Eric." We were wrong. But they didn't want me to make it. Not really. Because me winning meant they had to admit they were wrong. That they had been cruel. That they had treated me like a burden when I was just a kid trying to figure things out. And so, finally, at 29 years old, I let go. I stopped trying to earn something that was never going to be given. I deleted the group chat. I blocked every cousin who had messaged me since Christmas. I archived every email with a subject line that included, "Hey cousin," or "Quick question." And then I packed a bag, grabbed my laptop, and flew to Lisbon. I'd never been before. Didn't know anyone there. That was the point. The Airbnb was small but clean, tucked into a quiet alleyway with a view of red-tiled rooftops and crumbling stone. I worked during the mornings, walked for hours in the afternoons, and read in the evenings while sipping strong black coffee on the balcony. It was the first time in a long time that I didn't feel the need to perform. I wasn't the family disappointment. I wasn't the surprise millionaire. I was just me. In the quiet, I found something I hadn't realized I was missing, my own voice. I started journaling. Not in the cheesy self-help way, but just to process things. The first entry was a list of all the times I had felt small growing up. The second was a letter I'd never sent to my mother. By the fifth entry, I wasn't writing about them anymore. I was writing about the future. It was subtle at first, but the fog started lifting. One morning, I woke up with an idea for a new product, something simple, elegant, and incredibly useful for small business owners. A tool that could save them time and money without requiring a tech background. I sketched it out on a napkin, then started building a prototype over the next few weeks. I wasn't in a rush. There was no investor pressure, no looming rent, just curiosity, passion. By the time I left Lisbon 2 months later, I had a working beta and a team of 3 remote freelancers helping me refine it. I named the product Torch because it was designed to help people find their way through operational darkness. Not everything needs a clever acronym. I launched Torch quietly. No press release. No splashy campaign. Just a simple landing page and a few cold emails to small business forums and community newsletters. Within 6 weeks, we had 3,000 users. By the 3rd month, we were profitable. But here's the crazy part. I didn't feel the need to tell anyone. No social media posts. No humble brags. I didn't even put it on my LinkedIn. It was mine. Just mine. And for the first time in years, I felt free. One morning, while checking support tickets, I got a notification from my bank. A wire transfer had cleared. It was an automatic investment payout, mid-seven figures. I stared at the number for a while, then closed the tab and went back to answering a user's question about integrating Torch with QuickBooks. That's when I knew I'd healed. Not because I had money, but because the money didn't define me anymore. And then, one day, an email landed in my inbox. Subject line, "Eric, please call me." It was from my mom. I stared at it for a long time. Then I opened it. "Eric, I know you don't want to hear from me right now, and I probably deserve that. But things are complicated, and I really need to talk to you. It's about the family. It's important. Please, just call me. Even if it's just once." Mom. There was no "I'm sorry." No mention of anything specific. Just that generic phrase. It's about the family. I didn't call her right away. Instead, I called Hannah. She answered on the first ring. "Hey," I said. She sounded surprised. "Eric? You okay?" "I'm fine. Just got an email from Mom." A pause. I was wondering when that would happen. "What's going on?" Hannah hesitated. "I didn't want to be the one to tell you, but Brian's in trouble. Big trouble." I sat down. "What kind of trouble?" "Financial. Legal. Both. He tried to invest in some private crypto fund, really shady stuff. Used a ton of leveraged loans. It crashed hard. He's bankrupt. Might lose the house." I didn't say anything. "And now," Hannah continued, "the family's freaking out. Sharon's blaming your parents for letting Brian get too arrogant. Your dad's talking about dipping into their retirement. And, well, they think you're the solution." I closed my eyes. Of course they did. "Do they know how bad it is?" I asked. "They know, but they also know you can fix it. I'm not his bailout plan." "I know," she said gently. "But they don't." I didn't call my mom back that night. I needed time to think. Because while I had moved on from needing their approval, I hadn't moved on from the pain. And now they were clawing their way back, not out of love or regret, but out of desperation. That was the moment I realized something deeper. They didn't just want my money. They wanted my silence. They wanted to bury the years of mistreatment under a fresh layer of family loyalty. They wanted to pretend the past didn't happen as long as I could fix the future. And maybe I could, but I wasn't going to do it quietly. Not this time. When I finally replied to my mom's email, I kept it short. Just one sentence. "Let's talk in person." I sent it at 11:49 p.m., knowing she'd be awake. Sure enough, she replied within 10 minutes. "Of course. We're always here. Maybe dinner this weekend." We. Right. The same we who forgot my birthday 3 years in a row. The we who used my name as a punchline while I scraped together freelance contracts to survive. The we who now saw me as their last hope of plugging the hole in their sinking ship. I booked a flight for Friday and called Hannah. "Are you sure?" she asked. "You're walking into a lion's den." I'm not walking in empty-handed. I didn't tell her everything. Not yet. But I needed someone on the inside, someone I could trust. Hannah was the only person in my family who had ever shown genuine kindness without expecting anything in return. She was quiet like me, always a little on the fringes of the family chaos. A good listener. Smart. Observant. She'd seen the cracks in our family long before I did. When I dropped out of college, she was the one who snuck me a care package with instant coffee, ramen, and a little card that said, "Keep building." I told her to keep her ears open, that I might need her help soon. She didn't ask questions, just said, "Got it." By the time my flight landed, I already had a plan. Not to humiliate them. Not to scream or gloat or demand apologies I'd never get. That would be too easy, and frankly, too small. What I wanted was bigger than that. I wanted the truth to come out. I wanted them to see, in full clarity, who they really were. I wanted them to feel the weight of every moment they made me feel invisible. But I wasn't going to do it with rage. I was going to do it with precision. Friday night, I pulled up to the house I hadn't stepped foot in since the last holiday I was invited to. Same siding. Same creaky porch light. Same overgrown hydrangeas Mom used to brag about in her Christmas cards. My dad answered the door. He looked older. Tired. His eyes flicked up to mine, cautious and guarded. "Eric," he said, nodding once like we were strangers meeting at a conference. "Dad." He stepped aside, letting me in. The living room looked exactly the same, except now there were subtle signs of stress. A pile of unpaid bills hidden under a glossy reel, simple magazine. a chipped corner on the coffee table that had been taped instead of replaced, a half-full glass of wine sitting next to an open laptop, with bank statements still visible on the screen. My mom appeared from the kitchen. She smiled, too quickly. "There you are," she said, pulling me into an awkward hug. "We were just saying how nice it would be to have you home again." Home. The word sat heavy in my chest. We sat down. She brought tea. No one said anything for a few minutes. Then my dad cleared his throat. "So, thank you for coming. We weren't sure if you'd respond." I almost didn't. He nodded, like he expected that. My mom gave a soft sigh. "Eric, we know things haven't always been perfect between you and the family." That was her version of an apology. "But we're hoping we can start fresh," she continued. "There's just been a lot going on lately. You've probably heard." "Brian," I said. They exchanged a look. "He's made some poor decisions," my dad said, choosing his words carefully. "He's facing a difficult time. And the thing is, we've all been trying to support him as best we can. And now you want me to do the same." They didn't answer. "I get it," I said, setting down my tea. "You think I'm rich, so I'm the solution." My mom's mouth tightened. "It's not like that." "No," I asked. "Because you didn't care where I was 3 years ago. Now suddenly I'm a family priority." "That's not fair," she said. "No," I replied. "It's not." The silence that followed was long and brittle. Then my dad leaned in. "We don't want a handout. Just a loan. Something to help get Brian back on his feet. Maybe keep the house until things stabilize." I took a breath and met their eyes. "I'll consider it," I said. "But on one condition." They perked up. "I want the entire family to meet next weekend. Everyone. One dinner. I'll cover it." My mom blinked. "Why?" "I want to talk. To all of you. At once." My dad looked suspicious. "What are you planning?" "Nothing dramatic," I said. "Just a conversation. About the past. And the future." They hesitated. Then my mom nodded. "Okay." I smiled. "Good. I'll reserve the venue." That night, I checked into a hotel and pulled out my laptop. Operation began. Step 1. I hired a private videographer. Discreet. Professional. Not for anything public, just documentation. I wanted a full recording of what was going to happen. I had a feeling I'd want to watch it again someday. Step 2. I booked a private dining room at a high-end restaurant in the city. Not too flashy. Intimate. Controlled. Step 3. I contacted Hannah. "You're really doing this?" she asked when I told her. "I need your help. 2 things." "Name it." "First, I need you to convince them all to show up. Everyone. Use whatever angle works. Free dinner. A surprise. Family reconciliation. Doesn't matter." She laughed. "I'm on it." "What's the second thing?" "I need a full rundown of every time they've talked about me behind my back. Every joke. Every insult. Especially from Brian, Sharon, and Taylor." There was a pause. "Are you sure you want to dig that up?" "I need it," I said. "I need to remind myself I'm not overreacting." She sighed. "Okay, I'll make notes." Over the next few days, I stayed quiet. Let the wheels turn. Let them start believing something soft and sentimental was about to happen. The emails started trickling in. "Amber, so excited to see you. Been too long." "Taylor, glad you're back. We all make mistakes, right?" "Uncle Rob, good on you for stepping up. Shows real growth." They had no idea. And Brian? He didn't reach out at all. Not a word. Not a text. Not a question. That told me everything. On the morning of the dinner, I met with the restaurant staff. Reviewed the seating chart. Checked the audio equipment. The cameras were hidden, but positioned well. One behind a framed painting. Another in a bookshelf. One small mic clipped beneath the centerpiece. I didn't want confrontation. I wanted clarity. I didn't want vengeance. I wanted recognition. By 6:30 p.m., they started arriving. Brian walked in with his usual arrogance, his wife clinging to his arm like a decorative accessory. Sharon followed, eyes scanning the room like she was about to judge a wedding venue. My mom floated around, pretending to play hostess. My dad stood stiffly in the corner, trying to act like he was the one paying for all this. I wore a dark gray suit, tailored, subtle. I didn't want to look like money. I wanted to look like control. At 7:05, everyone was seated. 17 people, all staring at me. "Eric," my mom said, raising her glass. "Would you like to say a few words before dinner?" I smiled. As a matter of fact, yes. I would. I stood, cleared my throat, and looked around the room. "Thanks for coming," I began. "It's been a long time. I appreciate you all being here." Polite smiles. Nods. I wanted to have this dinner, I continued, because for years, I thought I was the problem. I thought I was the broken one, the dropout, the failure, the disappointment. No one moved. I missed birthdays, holidays. I wasn't invited to weddings. And when I was, I became the joke. And I accepted it. I thought, maybe I deserve this. Maybe if I just work harder, succeed more, I'll earn my way back in. Now some of them shifted in their seats. But that's not how families should work, I said, voice still calm. Love isn't conditional on success. Respect isn't something you give only when someone becomes useful. Brian rolled his eyes. And so, I said, looking straight at him, when I see people in this room now reaching out, asking for favors, calling me after years of silence, it tells me one thing. I paused. You didn't change your minds about me. You just changed your math. Gasps. A few heads turned. This isn't revenge, I said. This is closure. I'm not here to punish anyone. I'm here to say this. I see you. I see who you really are. And I'm done pretending otherwise. I sat down. Silence. The kind that makes your ears ring. And just when it seemed no one would speak, Brian slammed his hand on the table and stood up. Are you serious right now? I looked up at him. You think you're better than us? Because you got lucky. That's when I saw it. Panic. Not just anger. Not just pride. But fear. Because he realized. I wasn't here to save him. Brian's words hung in the air, loud and brittle. You think you're better than us? Because you got lucky. I didn't flinch. I didn't raise my voice. I just looked him in the eye and said, no, Brian. I know I'm better than you. Not because I made money, but because I never kicked you while you were down. That silenced him. Completely. For a second, I saw something behind his eyes, some flicker of recognition, or shame, or maybe just fear, but then it disappeared behind the usual smugness. He laughed once, sharp and hollow, then muttered something under his breath and sat down, jaw clenched, eyes burning. My mom tried to smooth it over with a nervous chuckle. All right, well, maybe we all got off on the wrong foot tonight. Let's just... No, I said, cutting her off. Calm. Steady. We're not brushing this under the rug. Not this time. The table went quiet again. You could hear the slow drip of water from the wine cooler in the corner. I leaned forward, resting my forearms on the table, and turned to face the room. You all wanted something from me. Let's not pretend otherwise. My success didn't bring you pride. It brought you discomfort. Because it came without your permission. Without your support. Uncle Rob opened his mouth, but I raised a hand. Let me finish. He closed it. Some of you asked for money. Others assumed I'd offer it. None of you apologized. Not one of you picked up the phone in the last 3 years just to say, I'm sorry for how we treated you. You just waited until I was worth something. Now there were frowns, guilt in some eyes, defensiveness in others, but no denials. I was invited here under the guise of family. But this isn't family. This is opportunism, and I wanted to see it in the light. I pulled out a folder from under my chair and set it on the table. Thick, labeled. Everyone stared. These, I said, are notes, emails, messages, all from you, over the years. Things you said about me when you thought I wasn't listening. I looked directly at Sharon. You once told Amber that I'd end up back at home, mooching off my parents by 30. Sharon stiffened, red creeping into her face. I turned to Taylor. You laughed when I couldn't afford to fly home for Thanksgiving and said, quote, he probably lives in a tent. Taylor opened her mouth, but I didn't stop. And Brian, I said, finally turning to him. You stood in front of 200 people at your wedding and said, at least Mom and Dad have one successful son. The table was frozen. Brian's wife shifted uncomfortably. Hannah stared at her lap. My mom looked like she might be sick. I kept receipts, I said, not because I wanted revenge, but because I needed to remember why I walked away. Then I pulled out the second folder. This one was thinner, labeled offers. I was prepared to help. Believe it or not, I was. I put together a recovery plan for Brian's debts. I worked out a restructure plan that would have let him keep the house. I even spoke with a financial advisor about setting up a trust for his kids. Brian's head snapped up. But then I watched how you all reacted when you thought I was still weak, I said. And I realized something. I slowly slid the folder toward the center of the table, then pulled it back and dropped it into my briefcase. You don't deserve my help. You've never deserved it. And I'm done offering it. Brian stood up again, this time red-faced. You arrogant little. I stood too. Not angry. Just tired. This dinner was your test. I said, to see if you could show some growth, some humility, to see if anything had changed. But it hasn't. You still see me as the kid who didn't go to law school, the dropout, the joke. I walked to the center of the room and turned to face them all one last time. So here's what's going to happen. I took a deep breath. Brian, you'll be getting a notice next week. Your bankruptcy trustee is about to receive a file I compiled because your crypto losses weren't just stupid. They were illegal. You misrepresented loan documents to 3 lenders, and I happen to know 2 of them are federally insured. You're looking at fraud. I could have kept quiet. I could have bailed you out. But you burned that bridge when you mocked me at your wedding and tried to ambush me at Christmas. You wanted to see what rock bottom looks like. You're about to find out. Brian's face went pale. His wife looked like she was about to cry. I turned to Sharon. Sharon, that consulting agency you opened last year? You listed me as an informal backer to secure your initial clients. I didn't even know until one of them reached out to thank me. That's impersonation and false advertising. I'll be contacting your clients this week to clear up the misunderstanding. Good luck rebuilding your brand. Her jaw dropped. Eric, please. I raised a hand. Taylor, I already reported the fake charity page you set up in my name. The one where you said I was matching donations. You'll be lucky if GoFundMe doesn't press charges. And if you're wondering who sent the screenshots to them, look no further. She stared at me, stunned, then slowly looked at her phone under the table. And Mom. I turned to her last. She looked broken, fragile in a way I'd never seen before, like someone who had built her entire identity around controlling the narrative, and now the seams were ripping apart. You never defended me. Not once. Not when I was mocked. Not when I was excluded. You joined the laughter because it was easier than standing up for your own son. And now you want to pretend that none of that happened. That we're just a family again. Her eyes were glassy. Eric, I made mistakes. You made choices, I said. And so did I. I walked to the door and picked up my coat. Turned back one last time. I'm not your son anymore. Not in the way you understand the word. I've outgrown this family. I've outgrown the smallness, the pettiness, the manipulation. You can keep the memories. I'm moving forward. I nodded once to Hannah, who gave me the faintest nod back. Then I left. The fallout came quickly. Brian's indictment was quiet but very real. A few months later, I read the court summary online. Fraud, misrepresentation, multiple counts. His assets were frozen. The house was gone. He moved in with Sharon, who by then had lost most of her client base and was begging on LinkedIn for freelance gigs. Taylor's GoFundMe page was deleted. She posted a long, vague Facebook status about toxic men who destroy women's dreams. No one bought it. My parents stopped calling. At first, I thought they might fight back, might try to salvage the narrative. But they didn't. I think they finally realized the power shift wasn't temporary. It was permanent. I wasn't coming back. I moved to a coastal town that spring. Bought a place with a wide porch and tall windows. Torch kept growing. I hired Hannah as operations manager. She was brilliant, organized, strategic, thoughtful. I paid her more than she'd ever earned before, and she earned every bit of it. We had coffee once on the porch, just the 2 of us, looking out at the waves. Did it feel good? She asked. I thought about it. Yes, I said, but not because I hurt them, because I don't need them anymore. She nodded, then grinned. You know they think you're a villain now, right? I smiled. They called me a failure for years. Let them call me a villain. I'd rather be a villain with peace than a hero in their broken story. And that's the last time I looked back. My name's Alex. I'm 27, and if there's one thing you need to know about me, it's that I'm a quiet person. Not shy, not weak, just quiet. I learned early on that in my family, speaking up only made you a bigger target. You see, my family has always been difficult. Not the kind of we have fun, we yell but we love each other, kind of difficult. No, mine was the kind where love felt like a tightrope you had to walk perfectly, or you'd get shoved off without warning. It all really came to a head one night at a family dinner. It was supposed to be a celebration. Dad had paid off the last of the mortgage, and my younger sister, Amanda, had gotten a promotion at her new job. I showed up out of habit, not expectation. I knew better than to think it would actually feel like a celebration for me. Dinner started off stiff, the way it always did. Amanda and my parents were trading compliments, inside jokes, laughter that didn't quite reach their eyes. Meanwhile, every time I spoke, it was like throwing a stone into a well, just a cold, echoing silence in response. It wasn't new. I had paid my own way through college, started my own small business, and kept my distance financially and emotionally after years of being used as the family's personal safety net. None of that seemed to matter. In their eyes, I was still the problem child, the ungrateful one. Halfway through dinner, while Amanda was gushing about some bonus she got, my mom rolled her eyes dramatically and muttered, loud enough for the entire table to hear, "Honestly, you're the family's biggest regret." I didn't flinch. I didn't argue. I didn't even blink. I just put down my fork carefully, folded my napkin, stood up, and walked out without a word. I could feel the heat of their stares, hear the stunned silence ripple around the room, but I didn't look back. I drove home that night gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. I wasn't angry, not exactly. It was something colder, deeper, a quiet finality sinking into my bones. Over the next few weeks, I stayed low. No family group chats. No phone calls. No birthday wishes to Amanda when her birthday rolled around. I wasn't punishing them. I was just done. Really, truly done. And because I was done, I stopped doing the things I used to do for them without thinking. The electricity bill that I used to quietly pay because Dad had been out of work last year, I canceled my automatic payments. The truck payments I had been secretly covering because they were about to lose their only means of transportation, gone. The little financial safety nets I had woven for them, stitch by stitch, over the years, they all unraveled the moment I stepped away. I didn't really expect them to notice right away. They were so used to things magically working out, assuming it was just luck, or that the universe would always hand them a cushion. I figured it would take a while before they felt the effects. It didn't. About a month after that dinner, my phone exploded with a call from Amanda. I stared at her name flashing across my screen for a long moment before I picked up, curious more than anything. The first thing I heard was screaming. "Alex, why did they tow Dad's truck? Why is the electricity shut off?" Mom's freaking out. Dad's threatening to sue the power company. And I swear if you had anything to do with this. I cut her off, my voice calm. "I didn't do anything to you. I just stopped doing things for you." There was a stunned pause, like she genuinely couldn't comprehend what that meant. Then the yelling started again, accusations flying at rapid-fire speed. I didn't respond. I just ended the call, typed out a short, cutting text, "Regrets don't keep the lights on," and turned off my phone. Part of me expected to feel guilty. That old reflex to make things better, to fix it all, to be the silent backbone they leaned on without ever thanking me. But I didn't feel guilty. I felt light. Free, almost. Like I had been carrying a weight for so long that I forgot what it was like to walk without it. Over the next few days, word trickled in through mutual acquaintances. My parents were spiraling. Dad's truck, the same old pickup he had refused to upgrade because it was reliable, had been repossessed when they missed 3 months of payments. The electricity at the house was out because the utility company had finally caught on to the unpaid balance racking up under my name. Back when I had stupidly offered to help out during a tough time and never got around to switching it back over. Apparently, they were scrambling, furious, blaming everyone but themselves. Amanda was calling every relative she could think of, spinning a story about how I had betrayed the family, left them high and dry. But the thing about constant takers is that eventually, people get tired of giving. The sympathy they expected wasn't exactly pouring in. I kept to myself, kept working, kept building the life they had mocked me for chasing. But the part that hit hardest, the part that stayed with me, was realizing how little they actually knew about me. They didn't even know what I did for a living. Amanda once joked at a family barbecue that I sold rocks on Etsy or something, and everyone laughed like it was the funniest thing they'd ever heard. Meanwhile, my consulting business was bringing in more income than both my parents' jobs combined. Sitting alone in my apartment one evening, watching the sun set over the city skyline, I thought about all the birthdays, holidays, and milestones I had spent trying to earn their approval. All the moments I had twisted myself into something smaller, quieter, more palatable. All the times I had bailed them out because some desperate part of me still clung to the hope that if I just did one more thing, just gave a little more, maybe they'd finally see me. And now, they were drowning in the mess they made. I should have felt triumphant. Maybe part of me did. But mostly, I just felt tired. Tired of carrying guilt that was never mine to begin with. Tired of pretending that family means unconditional loyalty, even when it's one-sided. Still, as the messages and voicemails piled up, first angry, then desperate, then pitiful, I knew this was only the beginning, because I hadn't even touched the biggest string yet. And once I did, everything they thought they still had would come crashing down around them. The turning point came late one Friday night, 2 weeks after Amanda's screaming call. I had just finished a project for a client, a massive one that would secure my income for the next year, and I was lying on the couch, flipping through channels mindlessly, when my phone buzzed again. This time, it was my dad. The message was short: "You owe us. You wouldn't be where you are without everything we sacrificed." I stared at the words, feeling the familiar mix of disbelief and cold rage settle in my gut. Owe them? For what? For the years of emotional neglect? For the endless gaslighting that told me I was never enough, even as I bent over backward trying to support them? No, that was the final straw. They had no idea how much of their life was still tethered to me. No idea that the sacrifices they made, the ones they lorded over my head, were bankrolled by loans I had co-signed, by utilities in my name, by property taxes quietly paid behind the scenes. And they really had no idea that I was about to cut the last remaining cord. You see, about a year prior, when they were teetering on the edge of losing their house, Dad had come to me, hat in hand, asking for help. He blamed the economy, blamed bad luck, blamed everyone except his own reckless spending. I was still naive enough to believe I could fix things back then, so I agreed to help under one condition: that the house title be partially signed over to me, just to ensure some level of responsibility. He agreed. He didn't care about the fine print. He just needed money, fast. I spent the next month bailing them out, setting up payment plans, negotiating debts. They didn't thank me. They barely acknowledged it. Once the immediate crisis was over, they went right back to treating me like a burden they tolerated. But legally, that house wasn't just theirs anymore. It was mine, too. So that night, as my dad's message simmered on my screen, I pulled up the paperwork from the safe in my closet. I read through it carefully, heart pounding, not with fear, but with an electric, buzzing anticipation. The documents were airtight. My lawyer had made sure of that after the first time Dad tried to reinterpret a verbal agreement. In short, I had the legal right to force a sale of the property. And so, I did. I filed the papers Monday morning. Quietly. Efficiently. No warning. No phone call. They would find out the way I had found out about being the biggest regret, publicly, unavoidably, and with no chance to spin the story in their favor. The eviction notice would come later, but first, there would be a court hearing. They'd get a letter in the mail explaining everything, that due to failure to uphold financial obligations, I was exercising my right to liquidate the property and recover my investment. They wouldn't be able to stop it. Not unless they somehow came up with the tens of thousands of dollars they owed, and given that they couldn't even keep the lights on, I wasn't exactly worried. I didn't go to the hearing. I didn't need to. My lawyer handled everything. But I heard about it afterward through a mutual friend, one of the few family members who had quietly cut ties with the rest years ago. Apparently, Mom showed up furious, flailing and crying about how family doesn't sue family. Dad tried to swagger his way through it at first, blustering about understandings and loyalty. But when the judge pointed out the signed contracts with his signature on every page, he deflated like a sad balloon. Amanda wasn't even there. She had moved in with her boyfriend across town and hadn't looked back since the electricity got shut off. Typical. The house was ordered to be sold within 90 days. If they didn't vacate willingly, they would be forcibly removed. And given the state of their finances, there was zero chance they could buy me out or refinance. For the first time in my life, I didn't feel like the kid begging for a seat at the table. I was the one flipping the table over entirely. I kept my distance in the days that followed, but the messages didn't stop. My mom sent email after email, swinging between venom and begging. Dad tried to call a few times, leaving long-winded voicemails where he tried to guilt-trip me about everything they did and how they raised me. Amanda? She sent a single text. "You're disgusting. I hope you're happy." I didn't reply. What was there to say? They were reaping what they had sown. I had given them chance after chance. Years of my life. Tens of thousands of dollars. Every last scrap of patience and forgiveness I had. And they had thrown it away with a roll of the eyes and a single, cutting sentence: "You're the family's biggest regret." Maybe they had expected me to come crawling back. Maybe they thought they could insult me, use me, discard me, and I'd still be there, desperate for their approval. But I wasn't that kid anymore. I was done begging for scraps from a table I had built with my own two hands. Still, part of me wondered if they understood, really understood, what was about to happen. Because losing the house? That was just the start. There was still one more domino left to fall. And once it did, there would be no going back. The first sign that things were slipping beyond their control came about 3 weeks later. I was sitting at a coffee shop on a Saturday morning, flipping through some design drafts for a new project, when I got a notification from the county office. A lien had been placed on the house. Apparently, my parents had tried to take out a desperate loan to stop the forced sale, and predictably, they defaulted almost immediately. I wasn't surprised. What had surprised me was just how fast everything started crumbling after that. It was like one wrong move had triggered an avalanche they couldn't outrun. According to my lawyer, once the lien was attached, the value of the property dropped. Not drastically, just enough to ensure that after the debts were paid off, there wouldn't be much left. Certainly not enough for them to start over, the way my mom kept screaming about in her increasingly unhinged emails. She wrote like I was some villain, lurking in the shadows, plotting her downfall, when all I had really done was finally, stop saving them from themselves. A week after that, Amanda showed up at my building. I live in a mid-rise, nothing fancy, but secure enough that you can't just wander in off the street. She must have tailgated someone through the entrance because I found her pounding on my door, her voice carrying down the hall. I opened it just a crack, keeping the chain on. The sight of her startled me. She looked worn out, pale, with deep bags under her eyes, like she hadn't slept in days. Her voice was raw when she said, "Alex, please. You don't understand what you're doing. You're ruining everything." I kept my expression blank. "I'm not doing anything to you. I'm just letting reality catch up." She flinched like I had slapped her. "You're punishing mom and dad because you're bitter," she hissed. "You're selfish. You're always so cold." Cold. That word again. They loved throwing it at me, didn't they? Every time I refused to jump back into the fire they lit. Every time I protected myself instead of bleeding out for them, I was cold. "Maybe," I said, my voice low. "But I'm not stupid anymore." Amanda's face crumpled for a second, just a flicker of real emotion, before the anger took over again. "They're your family, Alex. Families forgive each other." I closed the door a little further, leaving just enough space for her to hear the final words before I shut it in her face. "Families don't make you regret being born." The click of the chain sliding into place was deafening in the silence that followed. I didn't look through the peephole. I didn't wait to see if she left. I just walked back to my living room and sat down, my heart pounding, not with regret, but with grim determination. I thought that might be the end of it. That maybe, just maybe, they'd finally get the hint. I underestimated them. Again. Because 2 days later, I found out they were planning something. They were trying to challenge the sale. Not through legal channels, no, they knew they had no case there. They were trying to sabotage it from the inside. I heard from a mutual acquaintance, someone who, bless their heart, couldn't stand my parents either, that mom had been bragging about making sure no one would want to buy the house. "They can't take what no one wants," she had laughed. According to the message I got, they had already started. Trash piled up in the yard. Spray paint on the garage door. Broken windows. They were trashing their own home out of spite, thinking they could scare off any potential buyers. It was petty. It was childish. It was so them. And it didn't even matter. Because while they were busy vandalizing the property, while they thought they were playing some kind of last-ditch power game, they didn't realize one crucial detail. The bank had already approved a short sale. They didn't need to sell the house to a private buyer. The bank was going to take it off their hands regardless, fix it up later if needed, and resell it at a loss if it came to that. Their tantrum was pointless. All they were doing was speeding up their own eviction. When I got the confirmation email, I leaned back in my chair and stared at the ceiling, letting it all sink in. It was happening. There was no stopping it now. Still, even as I sat there feeling the weight of everything crashing down around them, there was one more thing gnawing at the edges of my mind. Something I hadn't even touched yet. Something that would hit them harder than losing the house, harder than losing their car, their credit, their security. They thought they were fighting for survival. They had no idea the real fight hadn't even started yet. Because tucked away in a file folder in my desk drawer was one final card. A document Dad had signed 5 years ago when he was desperate for a loan to save his failing construction business. A document that named me as a lien holder not just on the house, but on the business itself. And once I filed the paperwork attached to that lien, let's just say they wouldn't just be losing their home. They'd be losing everything. I sat at my desk that night, the city lights twinkling outside my window, the file folder open in front of me. My hands hovered over the paperwork, not because I was unsure, but because I was finally allowing myself to feel the weight of what I was about to do. It would be the final blow. No more safety nets. No more second chances. Dad's construction business, Warren Family Builders, had been struggling for years. He blamed the economy, cheap labor, bad luck, anything he could think of. What he didn't mention, what he never could admit, was that he was bad at running it. He didn't pay taxes on time. He burned bridges with suppliers. He took jobs he wasn't qualified for because his pride wouldn't let him say no. 5 years ago, he had come to me in a panic, begging for help. He said he just needed a small investment, enough to keep things afloat until the next big job came through. I had my doubts even then, but against my better judgment, and out of some desperate, aching hope that maybe this time would be different, I agreed. The contract was simple. I would loan him the money, and in exchange, I would hold a lien against the company. If he defaulted, if he failed to pay me back, I would have the legal right to claim the business assets, equipment, tools, vehicles, even the name, if I wanted it. Of course, Dad never paid me back. He never even tried. And deep down, I think I always knew this moment would come. So I sat there, pen in hand, heart steady, and signed the paperwork. The next morning, I filed everything through my lawyer. It didn't take long after that. Within 2 weeks, Dad got the notice. The business was being seized. The equipment would be sold at auction. The contracts he had lined up, what little he had left, would be void. The licensing would be revoked pending the outcome of his debt obligations. The day the notice arrived, he showed up at my apartment. I watched through the peephole as he banged on my door, his face red, his fist clenched, a broken man pretending he still had some kind of power over me. I didn't open it. He stood there for a long time shouting. First it was anger, "You selfish little snake. After everything we did for you." Then it was bargaining, "Alex, come on, we're family. We can fix this." Finally, it was pure, pathetic pleading, "Please, son, I'm begging you. We're ruined without the business." I leaned against the wall and listened, arms crossed over my chest. There was a time when that would have shattered me. A time when I would have rushed to open the door, to apologize, to offer money I couldn't afford to lose just to keep the peace. But not anymore. I had given them everything I could. Time, money, love, loyalty. All they had ever given me in return was regret. After about 20 minutes, he left. I watched from my window as he trudged back to his rusted-out sedan, the one Amanda had bought him after the truck was repossessed, and drove away, the taillight dangling like a loose tooth. It should have felt triumphant. Some grand, victorious moment. Instead, it just felt quiet. Not empty. Not hollow. Just peaceful. The house sold a month later. They were forced to move out, with nothing to their names but a few battered pieces of furniture and a mountain of debt they had no way to pay. Mom tried to stay with Amanda, but that didn't last long. Amanda's boyfriend kicked them out after 2 weeks of listening to my mom whine and blame everyone else for their downfall. From what I heard, they bounced around cheap motels for a while. Dad tried to pick up odd jobs, but his reputation in the community was trashed. No one wanted to hire the guy whose company went under in a public, humiliating fashion. Eventually, they ended up renting a one-bedroom apartment on the bad side of town. As for Amanda, she cut contact with them a few months later. She sent me a long email, part apology, part bitter resentment, telling me she couldn't deal with them anymore. That it was my fault for setting off the chain of events that destroyed the family, but also admitting, in one raw, unguarded sentence, that she envied me for getting out. I never replied. Some things don't deserve closure. Life moved on. My business thrived. I bought a small condo downtown, nothing extravagant, but mine. I made new friends, people who valued me for who I was, not for what I could give them. For the first time in my life, I celebrated my birthday without holding my breath, waiting for the punchline. Some nights, when the city hums low and the streets outside are dark and quiet, I think about them. About the way Mom used to ruffle my hair when I was a kid, before the weight of her disappointment settled into every glance. About the way Dad used to laugh before life hardened him into someone bitter and petty. I think about Amanda, the sister I loved even when she was cruel, even when she let me take the hits meant for her. I wonder if they miss me. But I don't miss them. Not really. I miss the idea of family, the fantasy I clung to for so long, the dream that if I just worked harder, loved more, gave more, it would be enough. It wasn't. And that's okay. Because sometimes, the greatest act of love you can offer yourself is the decision to walk away and never look back. The last message I ever received from my mother came on Christmas Eve, 6 months after everything fell apart. It was just 2 words. "We're sorry." No explanations. No excuses. No promises to change. Just too little, too late. I deleted it without reading further. Some regrets, after all, don't keep the lights on. And some regrets deserve to be left in the dark. Forever. My name's Spencer. I'm 32, and if you told 15-year-old me that one day I'd be the successful one in the family, I'd have laughed you right off your bike. Back then, I was the quiet kid with hand-me-downs 2 sizes too big, the one who ate lunch alone and didn't complain when he got left behind. I was the second son, after Nathan, my older brother, who, according to everyone from our kindergarten teacher to our great-aunt June, was destined for great things. Nathan got the varsity jacket, the loud applause at graduation, the spot at Dad's mechanic shop. Me? I got out. Not in a dramatic suitcase in the rain kind of way, more like a slow fade out. I went to college on a scholarship, got a finance degree, and quietly clawed my way into a career most of my family didn't understand, let alone respect. Growing up, our family was fine, I guess. Blue-collar through and through. Dad ran a small but reliable auto shop, and Mom worked part-time at the school cafeteria. They did what they could with what they had. We weren't the Brady Bunch, but we weren't dysfunctional either, until you looked closer. Nathan, older by 3 years, learned early how to charm his way through anything. He wasn't cruel exactly, just entitled in the way only someone praised his whole life could be. Whenever something went wrong, the family shielded him. Crashed the car? Boys will be boys. Forgot Mom's birthday? He's just stressed. I learned to live in the silence between his loud mistakes. When I moved to another city after college, it was like disappearing from their radar. I came home for the big holidays, Thanksgiving, Christmas, but even then, it always felt like I was a guest at someone else's family gathering. Nathan would make little digs masked as jokes. Look who finally decided to visit. Or, must be nice, rolling in Wall Street money. For the record, I wasn't on Wall Street. I worked as a financial analyst at a mid-sized firm, lived in a modest 2-bedroom apartment, and still drove the same beat-up Civic I bought in college. But to Nathan, the idea that I wasn't scraping by like the rest of the family made me a punchline. Still, despite the jabs, I stayed connected. I called Mom once a week, even if it was just to hear her talk about her garden or some neighbor's dog drama. I sent cards on their birthdays. I offered to help with bills once or twice, which Dad always turned down with a gruff, "We're managing just fine." I respected that. I knew their pride. I knew mine too. So I kept grinding, working long hours, saving aggressively. When the pandemic hit and a lot of people lost their footing, I doubled down. I invested smart, took some calculated risks, and started building a real portfolio. By the time I was 30, I had enough for a down payment on a home, and not just for me. See, there's a quiet kind of ache that comes from knowing your parents spent their whole lives giving, only to face retirement with aching knees, fading dreams, and a house that creaked louder than they did. I couldn't stomach it anymore. So last year, I started looking. Nothing fancy, just something clean, accessible, and comfortable. A place where they could age with dignity, maybe even enjoy themselves a little. I settled on a charming 1-story ranch-style house in a peaceful neighborhood about 20 minutes from where they lived. Big backyard, modern appliances, a wraparound porch that caught the evening sun just right. $500,000, all in. I paid cash, told them it was an investment property I didn't want to rent out just yet, then handed them the keys and said, "Happy retirement." Mom cried. Dad went quiet in that way he does when emotion might crack his voice. Nathan? Nathan didn't say much at all, just nodded and said, "That's generous." It didn't bother me at the time. I wasn't doing it for praise. I was doing it because it felt right, because they deserved a soft landing after years of hard ground. We all moved some furniture in together. Me, Nathan, his wife Amelia, even a couple of his buddies. It was a good day, a rare one. Everyone smiling, no one sniping. But something changed after that. It was subtle at first. Calls from Mom grew shorter. She sounded tired. Not physically, more like emotionally drained, like she was choosing her words carefully. When I asked how the new place was, she said things like, "Oh, we're adjusting," or "It's nice, just taking time to settle in." I offered to come visit, maybe bring lunch. She hesitated. "Maybe next week, sweetie. We've just got a lot going on right now." That wasn't like her. Mom loved when I dropped by. She used to make a whole afternoon of it. Tea, sandwiches, those lemon cookies I could never replicate. Something was off. Then there was the time I FaceTimed her and saw that she was outside, wrapped in a shawl, sitting on one of the patio chairs. I asked if everything was okay inside. She gave me a tight smile and said, "It's just loud in there sometimes." I didn't push. I should have. Nathan hadn't called me in weeks either, which wasn't unusual, but still. After the house thing, I figured maybe we'd turned a corner. Maybe we weren't best friends, but at least we were family. I was wrong. A month after they moved in, I decided to stop by unannounced. Nothing dramatic. Just a surprise visit with some takeout and a bottle of wine Mom liked. It was a sunny Saturday afternoon, the kind of day that begged for a slow meal and good company. I pulled into the driveway, noticed a few unfamiliar cars parked out front, and felt my first twinge of unease. Maybe they were having guests. Maybe I was crashing something. But as I walked up the steps, I heard laughter, loud, boisterous, unfamiliar. I rang the doorbell. No answer. After a beat, I just let myself in. It was, after all, my house. The living room was packed. A group of women I didn't recognize were standing around with wine glasses, oohing and awing over the decor. Amelia, my brother's wife, was leading them around like a real estate agent. "This is the formal dining room," she was saying, "though we're thinking of knocking out that wall for more space." One of the women gasped, "Oh, it's beautiful. You guys are so lucky." Amelia beamed. "Yeah, it's our new place. Finally upgraded." I stood frozen in the doorway, takeout bag still in hand. No one noticed me at first. Then someone, Nathan, walked out from the hallway, saw me, and smirked. Not smiled. Smirked. Well, look who's here." I didn't say anything at first. Just scanned the room again, like maybe I had walked into the wrong house. But no, there was the photo of Mom and Dad on the mantle. There was the ceramic rooster Mom had owned since I was a kid, now perched above the kitchen cabinets. My jaw clenched. "Where's Mom?" I asked. Nathan shrugged. "She's around." I walked past him, down the hall toward the laundry room. The door was slightly ajar, and inside I found her, Mom, sitting on a small folding stool, eyes red, hands in her lap. The dryer was running, muffling the noise from the party. She looked up when she saw me, startled. "Spencer, what's going on?" I asked, setting down the food. "Why are you in here?" She hesitated. Her mouth opened, then closed. Finally, she whispered, "It's just easier this way." I didn't understand. Easier how? But before she could answer, Dad walked by, through the garage door, rubbing his eyes like he just woke up. He didn't notice me at first. Then he saw the food, saw me, and froze. "Dad, were you sleeping in the garage?" Another pause. Another tight-lipped smile. "It's cooler out there," he muttered. Something snapped inside me. I turned on my heel and stormed back into the living room. The women were laughing again. Amelia was showing off the pantry. Nathan had a beer in hand. I walked straight to the center of the room, pulled the deed out of my jacket pocket, because yes, I had brought it, thinking I might finally change the name over officially, and held it up. "Just so we're clear," I said loudly enough to silence the room. "This house belongs to Mom and Dad. Not you, not your wife, and definitely not your little real estate tour group." Every face turned to look at me. Dead silence. And Nathan? Nathan just looked at me with that same smirk and said, "It's only fair we get it now. They've had their turn." I didn't move. I didn't blink. I just stared at him. And that's when everything changed. I stood there in the middle of the living room, the deed in my hand, the weight of it suddenly heavier than I'd ever imagined. The silence stretched longer than it should have. One of the women coughed awkwardly. Another shifted her wine glass from one hand to the other. But all I could hear was the distant hum of the dryer down the hall and the dull thump of my own heartbeat in my ears. Nathan didn't flinch. That smirk stayed glued to his face like it was stitched on. He didn't look surprised to see me. He didn't look embarrassed, or nervous, or caught. He looked amused. Like I was a child stomping into the middle of his birthday party, demanding attention. And somehow that was worse than if he'd just gotten defensive or angry. "It's only fair we get it now," he repeated, this time with a lazy shrug. "They've had their turn." I turned slowly, scanning the room. Amelia wouldn't meet my eye. One of her friends, a woman with two perfect eyebrows and a designer handbag slung over her shoulder, gave me a once-over like I was the rude one for interrupting their wine and tour hour. "I bought this house for them," I said, quieter now, but every word was sharper. "They didn't ask for it. They didn't expect it. I did it because I wanted them to have something good. Something safe. You." I turned to Nathan. You had nothing to do with it. He tilted his head slightly, like he was humoring me. And yet, here we are. It was the smugness. That's what did it. Not the entitlement. Not even the blatant hijacking of the house. It was the arrogance. The absolute certainty that he could walk in, plant a flag, and claim something that wasn't his just because he believed he deserved it. You're sleeping in the master bedroom, aren't you? I asked him. Nathan leaned against the kitchen counter and sipped his beer. We moved in when they started having trouble getting around. It just made sense. Really? Because last I checked, Dad was sleeping on an air mattress in the garage. That got a few shocked gasps from the crowd. Amelia's lips parted, but nothing came out. Nathan didn't miss a beat. Dad likes the garage. Says it's cooler out there. I stared at him. You kicked our parents out of their own bedroom. We didn't kick them out, Amelia said quickly, her voice shaking a little. They offered. Spencer, they said it was fine. They said it was fine, I repeated slowly, because you made them feel like guests in their own home. No one made them feel like anything, Nathan snapped. If they wanted to speak up, they would have. But they didn't. So maybe you should think about why that is before you come in here like some knight in shining armor. I didn't answer him. Not right away. Because part of me knew he was right. Mom and Dad hadn't spoken up. But not because they were okay with it. Because they didn't want to start a war. Because they didn't know how. Because after a lifetime of enabling Nathan's behavior, they didn't believe anyone would take their side. Not even me. And the thing that stung most? They might have been right. I walked out of the room without another word. I found Mom still in the laundry room, now folding towels with the kind of mechanical care that made my chest ache. Spencer, she whispered when she saw me. I need the truth, Mom, I said, kneeling beside her. Are you okay? Really? She looked at me for a long moment. Her hands stilled. Then she closed her eyes and took a shaky breath. Your father wanted to sleep in the garage. Said it didn't matter where he laid his head as long as we had peace. And you? I asked. Where do you sleep? She hesitated. In the guest room. Sometimes the couch, if Amelia has friends over. My throat tightened. They treat you like visitors in your own house. She didn't answer that. She just folded the towel and set it in the basket like she hadn't heard me. But she had. I could see it in the way her shoulders curved inward like she was trying to make herself smaller. I stood and paced. Why didn't you tell me? We didn't want to cause trouble, she said softly. Your brother, he's struggling, Spencer. With what? Lack of shame. She gave me a look, sharp and tired all at once. He's got a family now. Amelia's trying to start her own business. They've been under pressure. We thought if we let them stay for a little while. They've moved in, Mom. They've taken over. They're telling people this is their house. She flinched at that, just slightly. We didn't want to disappoint you. Disappoint me? I repeated, voice breaking a little. You think I'd be disappointed in you for being kind? For letting your son bulldoze over your boundaries because you didn't want to start a fight? She smiled, sad and tired. You've always been the one who sees clearly, Spencer. Even when you were little. But not everything's that simple. Maybe it wasn't. But it also wasn't supposed to be this hard. I hugged her then, tightly, and whispered that I'd handle it. That she didn't have to live like this. That it wasn't fair. She didn't say anything. She just rested her cheek against my shoulder like she'd been waiting for someone to tell her that for a long time. Later that evening, I didn't go home. I booked a room nearby and sat with my laptop until midnight, going over every legal document I had. The deed was still in my name. I hadn't transferred it yet. Hadn't even filed the paperwork. The property taxes, the utility setup, the homeowner's insurance, it was all under my name. They couldn't claim squat. Not legally, but morally, emotionally. That was a whole different battlefield. The next week, things spiraled. I called Dad, asked him to meet me for lunch. He showed up looking more exhausted than I'd ever seen him. Bags under his eyes, stubble he usually kept clean-shaven, and a stiffness in his walk I hadn't noticed before. Your brother's not a bad person, he said after I brought up the house again. He's not a good one either, I replied. Not when he's pushing you out of your own bed. Dad sighed. It's not about beds. It's about peace. About letting things play out. But at what cost? He didn't answer. Just poked at his food like it had personally offended him. 3 days later, I got a text from Mom that shattered whatever patience I had left. Do you know where the title paperwork is? Nathan said we need it for Amelia's business loan. I called her immediately. What paperwork? The deed. The house deed. He said the bank wants to see proof of ownership for collateral. I was silent for so long she asked if the line had dropped. No, I'm here, I said slowly. Did you give it to him? No, I told him I'd ask you first. My blood ran cold. Mom, listen to me. Do not give him anything. Not a copy. Not a scan. Nothing. But Spencer, he said. I don't care what he said. That document is not his to touch. Later that night, I drove back out to the house. It was dark by the time I arrived, and as I pulled up, I noticed something that made my stomach drop. There was a for sale sign planted on the front lawn. I marched up to the porch, heart pounding, and knocked hard enough to rattle the frame. Amelia opened the door, blinking like I'd just woken her up from a dream. What's the sign for? I asked. She looked startled, then forced a smile. Oh, it's just a backup plan. Nathan has some ideas. We figured if we could sell this place and downsize, we could use the equity to invest. Equity? I repeated, stunned. You don't own anything. Nathan appeared behind her, arms crossed, jaw tight. We were going to talk to you about that. No, I snapped. You were going to go behind my back again. Try to manipulate Mom into handing over paperwork. Move my parents out of the house I bought for them so you could fund your own plans. He stepped forward. Spencer, don't act like you're some hero. You live in the city. You drop in once every few months and expect everything to stay perfect? Mom and Dad need support, day-to-day support, and we've been here. We've been doing the hard work. You've been squatting, I said, and calling it sacrifice. Amelia's voice shook. You don't understand what it's like, trying to build something from scratch. We needed a place. A fresh start. So you stole theirs? Nathan bristled. It's not stealing. It's family. Things change. People adjust. It's not our fault they don't need this space anymore. At that moment, I realized they genuinely believed it. That somehow, my act of generosity had turned into an open invitation. That my parents' silence had become consent. That Nathan saw their aging and uncertainty as an opportunity. I nodded slowly. You're right. Things do change. And with that, I turned around and walked back to my car. Because I knew what I had to do next. But not before one final betrayal hit, like a sucker punch the very next morning. I didn't sleep the night I saw the for sale sign on the lawn. I couldn't. I paced the hotel room like a caged animal, flipping through emails, rereading legal clauses, rereading my own texts with Mom like I could somehow rewrite history if I just stared long enough. But the truth wouldn't change. My brother had taken something pure, something I did out of love, and warped it into leverage. A tool. A pawn in whatever scheme he was playing at. The next morning, I drove back to the house before the sun even came up. I parked 2 houses down, just far enough not to be seen. I watched the porch lights blink on. I watched Amelia step out in a robe, cup of coffee in hand, as if nothing in the world could touch her. I stayed until Dad shuffled out from the garage, back hunched, dragging a plastic bag of trash behind him. The image of my father, once this towering figure who could fix anything with calloused hands and a wrench, now reduced to this silent tenant, broke something in me. That was my breaking point. But breaking isn't always loud. Sometimes it's quiet. Sometimes it's not a scream, but a slow inhale. Sometimes it's not revenge, it's resolve. I didn't confront them that day. I didn't storm in. I didn't wave the deed like a sword. I just drove home, gripped the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white, and started making calls. Not dramatic calls. Quiet ones. A real estate attorney. A financial advisor. My accountant. A notary. My mentor from college who knew a guy who dealt with domestic equity squatters, as he called them. I took notes. I listened more than I spoke. I kept everything tight and close to the chest. Because the more I realized how deep Nathan had his claws in, the more I knew I couldn't afford to act impulsively. That week, I hit rock bottom. Not financially. I was still doing fine on paper. My job was stable. My savings untouched. But emotionally, spiritually, it was like a sinkhole had opened beneath everything I thought was solid. My chest felt heavy. My appetite vanished. Work felt meaningless. I'd built a life with the goal of taking care of the people who mattered most, and somehow, doing exactly that had left me completely powerless. I couldn't eat without picturing my mom folding laundry in silence. I couldn't sleep without seeing Dad curled up on a garage cot like a forgotten uncle. And worse, I kept second-guessing myself. Maybe I had overstepped by buying them the house. Maybe Nathan was right. Maybe I should have consulted the whole family first. Maybe I'd embarrassed Dad by making such a big gesture. Maybe Mom hadn't told me the whole truth because she didn't want to hurt me. not because Nathan was hiding anything. I spiraled so hard, I almost deleted the deed file from my computer, like that would somehow undo the whole thing. But then, something changed. It was Mom. She called me 3 days later. Her voice was small, like she was speaking from inside a closet. "I just wanted you to know," she said, "that we're proud of you, even if we don't say it enough. And no matter what your brother says, your father and I know what you did for us." I sat there, phone pressed to my ear, unable to speak. "I saw the sign," she added after a pause. "On the lawn." I closed my eyes. "I didn't put it there." "I know," she said. There was a long silence. I could hear her breathing, could almost picture her standing at the kitchen window, cordless phone in one hand, staring out at the backyard she barely got to use. "You do what you need to do," she said. "We'll be okay." And just like that, I stopped spiraling, because I remembered who I was. I wasn't Nathan. I didn't need applause. I didn't need to manipulate. I didn't need to be seen as the favorite. I just needed to move forward. Carefully, quietly, permanently. So I began to rebuild. First, I cleaned up everything I'd let fall behind while obsessing over the house. I restructured my work calendar, got back into my morning workouts, even started cooking again. Simple meals, nothing fancy, but it made me feel grounded. I reconnected with some old college friends. Signed up for a local mentorship program where I could teach financial literacy to at-risk teens. I didn't tell anyone in my family about it. It was for me. A reminder that my value wasn't measured in how others used me, but in how I chose to show up. Second, I moved forward with legal protections. I had the deed officially recorded under my name, added clauses preventing unauthorized occupation, and created a revocable trust that could allow my parents to remain in the home indefinitely, but no one else. I updated my estate plan, made it watertight. My lawyer, a calm woman named Marla with gray-streaked hair and eyes like polished steel, reviewed every clause like she was preparing for war. "You're doing the right thing," she told me, sliding the papers back across the table. "And you're doing it the right way. Quiet is stronger than loud, Spencer. Don't forget that." The third thing I did, I visited my parents, this time with a plan. I didn't tell Nathan. I didn't tell Amelia. I waited until a weekday when I knew he'd be at work and she'd be out at her so-called boutique meetings. I texted Mom and said I was coming by for tea. She replied with a heart emoji. That meant yes. When I arrived, she was waiting on the porch. Her hair was pulled back, her cardigan neat. She looked like someone trying hard to hold things together. Dad came out a few minutes later, wiping his hands on an old rag like he'd just been working on something, probably organizing junk in the garage because he didn't have a workshop anymore. We didn't talk about Nathan. Not right away. Instead, I made them lunch. Tuna salad sandwiches, like Mom used to make when I was a kid. We sat in the backyard. Birds chirped. The sky was clear. For a moment, it felt like what I wanted this house to feel like, a gift, a safe place. When we finished eating, I handed Dad a folder. "What's this?" he asked, flipping through the pages. "Legal protections," I said simply. "You're not going to get pushed around anymore. Not by anyone. Not even family." Mom glanced at me. "Will this make things worse?" "No," I said, and for the first time, I believed it. "It'll make them real." Dad didn't say much. He just nodded and kept reading. Later, as I was leaving, he put a hand on my shoulder. "You didn't need to do all this, son." "I know," I said. "That's why I did." That night, I sat on my balcony, sipping tea, and feeling, for the first time in weeks, a sense of calm. Not peace exactly. The storm was still coming, but I was no longer adrift. I was steering now, and I had a plan. Because what Nathan didn't know was that the house he tried to sell wasn't his to list, that the equity he wanted to tap into didn't exist for him, that every paper trail led to me, and every legal move he thought he could make had already been blocked off. I didn't yell. I didn't threaten. I just waited. Waited for him to make the final mistake that would give me everything I needed to end this cleanly. And it came faster than I thought. It was the email that did it. Just 4 days after I'd had that lunch with Mom and Dad, I got a message forwarded from my real estate attorney, Marla. She'd been monitoring any activity linked to the property title at my request, and this one hit her radar like a siren. A digital submission request from a local mortgage broker trying to run a preliminary valuation on the house for pre-approval purposes. The borrower? Nathan Lowell. I stared at the screen, while rising in my throat. The request wasn't for a casual inquiry. It included scanned ID documents, his and Amelia's, pay stubs, And worst of all, a typed note in the broker's comment section that read, "This is a family-owned home, unencumbered. We live here and will be using it as collateral for the down payment on our new business location. Happy to provide anything else. Our home. We live here." It wasn't a misunderstanding. It wasn't a mistake. He was trying to use the house, my house, gifted in spirit to our parents, as leverage for a loan, without telling me, and without a shred of legal right to do so. The gall of it was staggering. But beneath the fury, I felt something steadier, colder. This was the opportunity I'd been waiting for. Marla called me as soon as I texted her. "He's overreached," she said simply. "You've got more than enough grounds now. This isn't just disrespectful, it's attempted fraud. I want to do this right," I said. "No drama. No headlines. Just clean, quiet, but permanent." "Then you need a setup," she replied. "And I have an idea." What followed was a 3-hour call that felt more like a strategy session for a corporate takeover than a family dispute. But I listened. I took notes. I did my homework. And slowly, a plan began to form. Not for revenge, exactly, but for removal. The first thing I did was upgrade the legal shield around the house. Marla helped me file a notarized affidavit of ownership and occupancy intent, then worked with a local judge to issue a notice of unauthorized occupancy, which we held in reserve for the perfect moment. The house wasn't being rented. Mom and Dad weren't listed as tenants, but as occupants with my written permission. That mattered, because it meant that anyone else, namely Nathan and Amelia, were unofficial at best and trespassers at worst. Meanwhile, I added cameras to the outside of the house. Not hidden ones, legal ones. I hired a professional installation team and framed it as updating my parents' home security, which, in part, was true. I made sure the cameras faced the front porch, the garage door, the side yard, and, most importantly, the driveway. That's where the black SUV always parked. Nathan's. The second thing I did, I gave Mom and Dad a vacation. They didn't want to go at first. Said they couldn't leave things like this. But I insisted. Paid for a 2-week stay at a quiet beachside rental I'd used myself before. Private, clean, fully stocked, and completely off Nathan's radar. They left on a Thursday morning, and by Friday evening, Nathan was already texting them. "Where are you? Why is there a lock on the garage door? Did you talk to Spencer again?" I watched from my phone as the footage came in. Amelia pacing the porch. Nathan muttering to himself in the driveway, trying to get a signal. He hadn't noticed the cameras yet. Or maybe he had, and just assumed they were Dad's idea. Either way, he wasn't subtle. There was yelling. Phone calls. At one point, he even brought 2 guys over to help move furniture, though they never went inside. Just circled the SUV and eventually drove off when no one opened the door. He didn't have a key. I made sure of that months ago. That weekend, I called in the next piece of the plan, the witness. Her name was Mrs. Aguilar. She lived across the street and had known my parents for years. She was the kind of neighbor who knew everything, who got home when, who mowed their lawn, who left lights on all night. I remembered her from my childhood as the woman who gave out full-size candy bars on Halloween and once bandaged my scraped knee with a kitchen towel and prayer. She hadn't been thrilled with Nathan's move-in, especially after the loud music, the sudden guests, and the time Amelia parked across her driveway and acted like she was the one being inconvenienced. When I showed up at her front door, she welcomed me with a knowing smile and an iced tea. "I was wondering when you'd come back," she said. I told her everything. She listened without interrupting once. And when I finally asked if she'd be willing to provide a witness statement about what she'd seen, the parties, the cars, Nathan saying things like, "We own this place now," to delivery drivers, she didn't hesitate. "Honey," she said, "you just point me at the notary." The next part was trickier, getting Nathan to put it in writing. So I created a fake opportunity. Nothing illegal, just a gentle push. I had an old friend, Jared, who worked in real estate development. I asked him to pose as a private buyer interested in residential investment properties. He reached out to Nathan via LinkedIn, pretending to be looking for a place to flip or co-invest in. And that's when Nathan took the bait. They had coffee. Nathan bragged. And within 2 days, Jared had an email chain in which Nathan claimed to own full control of a home his family transferred over informally. He even attached photos of the interior. Photos I had paid for. With my staging. Now I had everything I needed. The footage. The false claim to ownership. The witness. The paper trail. The next step was execution. Marla drafted the official notice of unauthorized occupancy. We filed it with the county, posted a copy on the front door, and sent a digital copy to Nathan's email, with legal language so airtight even the most delusional person couldn't pretend it was optional. The notice gave him 72 hours to vacate the property, remove any belongings, and cease representing the house as his own, or face formal legal proceedings. It was delivered on a Tuesday at 9 a.m. By 9:17, my phone rang. It was Nathan. "You think this is funny?" he snapped before I even said hello. "No," I replied calmly. "I think it's overdue. You're kicking your own brother out of Mom and Dad's house." "It's not their house, Nathan," I said. "It's mine, and they were guests of honor. You were an invader. You're overreacting. This is just a misunderstanding." "Really? Then why were you trying to use it as loan collateral?" Silence. "I have the email," I added. "From the broker. From Jared. From you. Want me to keep going?" More silence. "Then, they need us. You think they'll be okay without us there?" "They already are," I said. "They're on vacation. You didn't even notice." I could almost hear the blood drain from his face. "And when they come back," I continued, "they'll have a fully restored home with no tension, no arguments, no fake house tours, and no one sleeping in the garage. You'll regret this." "No," I said, "you will." And I hung up. But I wasn't done yet. The last part of the plan was the one I took the most care with, the return. Mom and Dad came back a few days later to a completely cleaned and reset house. I'd brought in a cleaning crew, repainted the garage, restored their original bedroom setup, restocked the pantry, and even left a small welcome back card on the kitchen table with a note. "Your home is yours again. Love, Spencer." Mom called me in tears. Dad didn't say much, just grunted in that emotional way he does when words aren't enough. But the relief in his voice, that said everything. Nathan, meanwhile, had gone radio silent, which was just fine, because the final move was still coming. The silence after Nathan's last phone call didn't feel triumphant. It felt like the moment right before a storm breaks. Heavy, electric, almost too still. I wasn't celebrating anything yet, because Nathan was the type of person who didn't back down until the world physically forced him to. He always needed a final blow to convince him the fight was actually over. That blow came faster than even I expected. On the morning of the 72-hour deadline, he showed up at the house before sunrise. I know because the cameras caught everything. Him stomping up the walkway, rattling the door handle, ringing the bell 5, 6, 7 times in a row. When no one answered, he grabbed his phone and started pacing across the porch, muttering into the speaker. Then he spotted the notice taped across the door. His face went pale, then red, then pale again. He ripped it off and read every line. I watched his jaw move as he traced the words with his eyes. Unauthorized occupancy. Cease and desist. Immediate removal. Owner retains sole authority. Legal action pending. He crumpled the notice in his fist, threw it into the flower bed, and stormed back to his SUV. He revved the engine hard enough to make the camera shake. Then he peeled out of the driveway like a man trying to outrun reality. It was the most peaceful morning the house had seen in months. But revenge, real, clean revenge, isn't about catching someone in a moment of panic. It's about letting their own choices close the door behind them. 2 days later, I got a frantic voicemail from Amelia. "Spencer, please call me back. This is all a misunderstanding. Nathan didn't mean." Well, he didn't know. Okay, he should have known. But we didn't realize the paperwork wasn't. Just please call me. I didn't. Another voicemail came an hour later. Then a text. "We need to talk. Please." I didn't answer that either. Because the next step wasn't about talking. It was about clarification. Marla and I moved forward with the final action. A formal filing with the county that barred Nathan and Amelia from making any claim on the property, plus a record of attempted fraudulent representation for a secured loan. It wasn't a criminal case. I didn't want one, but it was an official mark on their financial record. Just enough to keep lenders wary. Just enough that any future "we own the place" conversations would be met with a side eye from anyone with a license. We also filed a no trespass order on the property on behalf of myself, Mom, and Dad. When the sheriff's office delivered it, I heard from Mrs. Aguilar later. Nathan stood in the driveway arguing with the deputy until the man finally said, "Sir, the more you talk, the worse this looks." That finally shut him up. Meanwhile, I kept focusing on the rise. The mentorship program I had joined, teaching financial basics to teens, was unexpectedly grounding. Those kids reminded me of myself at that age. Quiet, unsure, overlooked. They asked questions I wish someone had answered for me when I was 16. Watching them light up when they understood taxes or savings or compound interest made me feel good, like I was building something real. I also started taking mom and dad out more. Sunday breakfasts, movie nights, trips to the farmer's market. They relaxed in ways I didn't even know they'd forgotten. Mom stopped wringing her hands. Dad's shoulders loosened. The house felt like theirs again, not a battlefield, but a home. One afternoon, a month after the eviction, we sat on the porch sipping iced tea while the sun dipped behind the trees. Mom glanced over at me and said softly, "I didn't know how much weight we were carrying until it was gone." That sentence alone made every sleepless night worth it. Nathan stayed quiet for a while, and I thought maybe he'd learn from this, or at least let it go. I was wrong. He reached out again, this time with a message so long I had to scroll 3 times. It started with excuses. "You blindsided us. We were trying to build a future." Then accusations. "You wanted to make us look bad. You enjoy being the hero." Then guilt. "Mom and dad will be alone when they need help, and you won't be there." Then finally, a confession wrapped in arrogance. "I deserve the house more than you ever did. I'm the one who stayed." I stared at the last line for a while. Stayed. As if staying was the same as sacrificing. As if proximity made him more loving, more worthy, more helpful. It didn't. If anything, his staying had created the exact cage mom and dad were living in when I found them. I didn't reply. Not out of spite, out of clarity. Some people aren't meant to be fought. They're meant to be excluded. But the real fallout came when Amelia called my mother. Not me. My mother. I only knew because Mom called me afterward, voice trembling between frustration and disbelief. She said, "Mom began carefully, that you humiliated them, that you're selfish, that you ruined their plans." I took a long breath. "What did you tell her?" Mom hesitated. Then her voice steadied. "I told her the same thing I told your brother. This house was never theirs. It was never up for debate. And if they need a place to stay, they should start by finding one they can afford." I pictured my quiet, gentle mother saying that with her soft voice and steady eyes. And I felt something warm press against my ribs. Pride. Real, bone-deep pride. She continued. "And I told her if they ever set foot on our property again without your permission, I will call the sheriff myself." I had to sit down after that. Not because of the drama, but because my mother, the woman who apologized when someone stepped on her foot, had found her voice again. And she wasn't giving it back. Life settled into place after that. Nathan and Amelia moved to a small rental 2 towns over. His business loan was denied, not because of me directly, but because the lender flagged him as a misrepresentative applicant. Amelia's boutique plan stalled. They stopped showing up unannounced. Stopped calling. Stopped pretending. Mom and dad regained space, independence, and dignity. Dad started working on small woodworking projects in the garage again. His garage, not a makeshift bedroom. Mom replanted her herb garden. They hosted dinners again, invited their friends over, filled the house with laughter instead of tension. The home I meant for them was finally theirs in spirit. And me? I didn't feel vindictive. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt steady, solid, like the ground beneath me was finally level. One evening, I sat with Dad on the porch. He was whittling something small, a bird, I think, and I asked quietly, "Do you think Nathan will ever understand?" Dad paused, then shook his head. "Some folks don't learn until life teaches them. And sometimes life teaches them the same lesson over and over until it sticks. Do you think it'll stick this time?" He smiled faintly. "If it doesn't, that's not your burden anymore." And he was right. Nathan's path was no longer tied to mine, or my parents', or the house he tried to steal. Everyone had finally returned to the roles they'd chosen. Mom and Dad, free. Me, standing firm. And Nathan, facing the consequences of being the one who stayed for all the wrong reasons. The last time I drove away from the house after Sunday dinner, I caught my reflection in the rearview mirror, calm, steady, unshaken, and realized something that made the corners of my mouth lift. I hadn't just taken the house back. I'd taken my peace back, and I wasn't ever giving it away again. My name is James. I'm 26 years old, and I've been trying to carve out a life for myself, even if my family doesn't think much of it. It's always been that way. Really, Ever since I was a kid, I felt like I didn't quite belong. Not in the dramatic, I must be adopted way, but more like I was an outsider in my own home. I grew up in a family that valued practicality above all else. My parents, particularly my mom, believed that life had a simple formula: work hard, earn money, and don't waste time on things that don't directly lead to a stable career. My dad was a little more easygoing on the surface, but deep down, he had the same rigid mindset. And my older brother, Mark, took after them completely, maybe even more than they realized. Mark was always the golden child. He did everything right. Good grades, sports, a well-paying job straight out of college. He followed the blueprint my parents believed in, and they adored him for it. I, on the other hand, was the disappointment. Not because I was reckless or irresponsible, I never got into trouble, never made their lives difficult, but because I didn't fit their definition of success. I studied something they considered pointless. It wasn't theater or philosophy or something stereotypically dismissed. I actually chose a field that had real value. But since it wasn't traditional, since it didn't have a clear, straightforward career path, they saw it as a waste. They never outright stopped me from pursuing it, but they never supported me either. Every conversation was laced with subtle, and sometimes not so subtle, jabs about how I should have picked something more useful. For as long as I can remember, I had to prove myself in ways Mark never did. He was naturally respected in the family. I had to earn every ounce of approval, and even when I did something objectively good, it was met with a lukewarm, half-hearted response. I graduated with honors, no one cared. I landed my first real job in my field. My mom sighed and said, "Well, at least you're making something." Meanwhile, Mark would get showered with praise for the most basic things. It wasn't just about careers. It was everything. At family gatherings, I was the one whose jokes fell flat, whose stories were interrupted, whose thoughts were dismissed as soon as Mark or my parents had something more interesting to say. I can't even count how many times I sat at the dinner table, completely silent, because I knew no one cared what I had to say. And yet, despite all of this, I stayed connected. Not because I particularly wanted to, but because I felt like I had to. I still wanted to be a good son, a good brother. And, if I'm being completely honest, I still had that stupid hope, the hope that maybe one day, something would change. That maybe, eventually, they'd see me as an equal. But things only got worse after college. I started making money, not a lot at first, but enough to get by, enough to be independent. And that's when things took an unexpected turn. My parents, who spent years acting like I was a disappointment, suddenly started coming to me for help. Not in a "we're struggling, please help us" way, but in a casual, almost entitled way. My mom would offhandedly mention bills that needed to be paid, expecting me to pick up the slack. My dad, who never once seemed to care about my financial situation before, suddenly started hinting that he could use some extra money for things. And Mark? Mark, who made plenty on his own, never seemed to be asked for anything. It was always me, the one with the useless career. The one who, just months before, they were still mocking for wasting time. At first, I helped because I felt obligated. They were my family, after all. But it didn't take long to realize the pattern. Every time I gave, they expected more. My mom started treating me like an extension of her income rather than an independent person. My dad would casually drop hints about how it was only fair for me to pitch in more. It wasn't about need, it was about control. I tried setting boundaries. I told them I couldn't always help, that I had my own expenses. The response? Guilt trips. Lectures about family responsibilities. Subtle and sometimes not so subtle. Comments about how Mark was so much more successful and how they wouldn't have to ask him because he had his life together. For years, I put up with it. I let the comments slide. I bit my tongue at the family gatherings where they treated me like an afterthought, and I kept helping, even when it hurt me financially. Because that's what family does, right? That's what I told myself, over and over again. And then, last weekend happened. My mom decided to host a big family dinner. Nothing unusual, she did this every couple of months, inviting over aunts, uncles, and cousins. I wasn't particularly looking forward to it, but I went. I always went. Because despite everything, I still wanted to believe I was part of this family. Dinner was the same as always. I was largely ignored unless someone wanted to make a joke at my expense. I had learned to tune it out by now, keeping my focus on my plate and nodding along when necessary. It was a survival tactic. If I reacted, it would only encourage them. But what I didn't know, what no one told me, was that Mark had set up his phone in the corner of the dining room, live streaming the entire thing. I didn't find out until the next day. I was scrolling through my phone when I saw a notification. Someone had tagged me in a post. Confused, I clicked on it. And that's when I saw it. A video. The entire family dinner, streamed for the world to see. At first, I thought it was just some harmless family content. Maybe a funny moment, maybe a random conversation. But then I started watching. And within the first few minutes, I felt my stomach drop. Because there it was. My mom, laughing as she called my degree completely useless. My dad chiming in, saying he still couldn't believe I was making a living off of it. Mark cracking jokes about how I'd probably end up crawling back to them one day, asking for real money. And the worst part? Everyone was laughing. Everyone. Not one person defended me. Not one person even hesitated. It wasn't just a couple of casual remarks. It was a full-blown roast session, all at my expense. And I just sat there, watching, listening to them mock me behind my back. I had put up with a lot over the years. But this was different. This was the moment something inside me finally snapped. I stared at the screen, my breath coming in short, uneven bursts. The laughter rang in my ears. My mom's voice, mocking. My dad's casual dismissal. Mark's smug tone. The distant sound of forks clinking against plates as the rest of my family chuckled along, enjoying the spectacle. I rewound the video. Once. Twice. Maybe I had misheard. Maybe I was overreacting. Maybe. No. Every word was exactly what I thought it was. They weren't joking in the way families sometimes playfully tease each other. This wasn't lighthearted. This wasn't innocent. It was cruel. It was deliberate. And worst of all, it wasn't just one moment in the video. I skipped around, scrubbing through the footage, hoping to find a single moment where someone, anyone, stood up for me. A cousin, an aunt, an uncle. Someone to say, hey, that's not fair. But all I found was more the same. More jokes at my expense. More smirking, more laughter. At one point, my dad even made an offhand comment about how it was a good thing I was helping out financially, because at least that made me somewhat useful. And my mom, in between bites of food, actually said, if he was smart, he'd have studied something worthwhile in the first place. And then Mark, ever the perfect son, leaned back in his chair and muttered, yeah, but it's fine. He'll realize eventually. He can't play pretend forever. I couldn't even blink. Pretend? Pretend? I had been working tirelessly to make my career work. Struggling through setbacks, pushing through rejections, working long hours to build something of my own. And the whole time, they saw it as nothing more than me playing pretend? Something inside me burned. I had spent years, putting up with their constant put-downs. Enduring the little comments, the condescending tones, the forced smiles that never quite reached their eyes when I told them about something I was proud of. And through all of it, I had still been the one helping them. Paying for things when my mom conveniently forgot her credit card. Covering bills when my dad was short this month. Transferring money when my mom sighed about how things were just a little tight right now. And this was how they saw me. I locked my phone and placed it on the table, my hands shaking. For a long time, I just sat there, thinking, processing. And then, slowly, a thought started forming in my mind. I had always been the one to keep the peace, to let things slide, to swallow my pride and do what needed to be done because they're family. But maybe it was time to stop. I reached for my phone again, unlocking it with a swipe of my thumb. I scrolled through my recent transactions, my fingers tightening around the device as I looked at all the payments I had made in just the last few months. Rent money, grocery money, utility bills, little things here and there that weren't a big deal, but added up to thousands of dollars over time. Thousands. And not a single word of appreciation. Not a single ounce of respect. I exhaled sharply, my mind racing. They expected me to keep playing my role. To keep nodding and smiling and handing over my hard-earned money while they mocked me behind my back. But they were about to learn something. I wasn't playing pretend. And I wasn't their safety net anymore. I took a deep breath, my thumb hovering over my mom's contact. Calling her first made the most sense. She was the one who always asked for money. The one who guilt-tripped me into giving more than I could afford. And I knew her well enough to predict how this would go. First, feigned innocence, then defensiveness, then a full-blown guilt trip about how I was overreacting and taking things too seriously. But this time, I wasn't going to let her manipulate me. I tapped the call button. It rang. Once. Twice. Then she picked up. James? What's wrong? Straight to the point. No hello. No pleasantries. Just immediate concern, Because she never got calls from me unless she needed something or I needed something. And since she hadn't asked for money in the last week, she probably assumed I was calling about a favor. I didn't waste time. I saw the video. There was a pause, a hesitation, a barely perceptible shift in her breathing. Then, in a carefully neutral tone, she asked, "What video?" I clenched my jaw. The one Mark posted. The live stream of family dinner. Silence. Then, a little laugh. Forced. Uneasy. "Oh, that. Come on, James, it wasn't a big deal." Not a big deal. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the ceiling. "So you knew about it?" She exhaled, irritated now. Of course I knew. Mark was just having a little fun. He does those streams all the time, you know. His friends love them. "I'm sure they do," I said flatly. "Especially when the whole family spends the night making fun of me." "Oh, James," she sighed, her voice taking on that patronizing tone that made my skin crawl. "You're being dramatic. Nobody was making fun of you." I let out a short, humorless laugh. "Really? So when Dad called my career embarrassing, that wasn't making fun of me? When Mark said I was playing pretend, that was what support?" She made a dismissive noise. "You're taking it too seriously. It was just dinner conversation. We joke around. You know that. Joke around. That's what they always said. Every cruel comment, every jab, every casual insult, just a joke. Just harmless fun." I pressed my fingers against my temple, trying to stay calm. "You do realize people could see that, right? Everyone. Strangers. My friends. My colleagues." Another pause. Then, a much more careful, measured response. "Did someone say something?" There it was. She didn't care that they'd humiliated me. She only cared if it had consequences. I closed my eyes, gripping the phone tighter. "It doesn't matter if someone said something, Mom. What matters is that my own family spent an entire meal tearing me down, and you let it happen." She scoffed. "Oh, please. You act like we sat around plotting ways to ruin your life. No one was thinking that hard, James. You're just sensitive." I exhaled through my nose, trying to keep my voice level. "I've been helping you for years. I've covered bills, groceries, rent. I've given you money when I barely had enough for myself. And this is what I get in return." "Oh, stop," she snapped. "We're family. That's what family does." I let that hang in the air for a second. Then, slowly, I asked, "What have you done for me, Mom?" She went quiet. I pressed on. "I mean it. What have you done for me? Because I can list everything I've done for you. But I can't think of a single thing you've done for me." "James," she said, her voice sharp now. "I raised you." I laughed, shaking my head. "That's your job as a parent. That's not a favor you get to hold over my head." Silence. Then she sighed, as if I were being exhausting. "Look, I don't have time for this. If you're going to sulk, do it on your own time. Just don't bring it up at dinner next week." I let out a breath. "I won't." "Good," she said, her voice lighter, like she thought she'd won. Because she didn't realize what I meant. I wasn't going to bring it up at dinner. Because there wouldn't be a next week. I was done. But first, I had one more call to make. I pulled up my dad's number and hit dial. The phone barely rang before my dad picked up. "James." His voice was firm, like he already knew why I was calling and didn't want to waste time pretending otherwise. I could hear the faint sound of a TV in the background, some sports game playing. "What do you want?" I didn't dance around it. "I saw the video." A pause. Then, in that same flat, unimpressed tone, he said, "And?" I gritted my teeth. "And you sat there, in front of the whole family, in front of the internet, and called my career embarrassing." "Because it is," he shot back without hesitation. "What do you want me to say, James? You could have been an engineer, a lawyer, hell, even a damn electrician, something useful. But instead, you're doing what? Whatever it is you do." I inhaled sharply through my nose, trying to stay calm. "I run my own business." He made a dismissive sound. "Sure, a business, if that's what you want to call it." That was the thing about my dad. He didn't just think I was a failure. He wanted me to be one. He had spent years acting like my work was some childish phase, something I'd grow out of when I came to my senses and got a real job. He ignored every success I had, brushed off every milestone like it was a fluke, a lucky break that wouldn't last. And yet, despite thinking I was so pathetic, he never had a problem taking my money. I tightened my grip on the phone. "I've been helping you for years, Dad. Paying your bills. Covering things when you came up short. You knew that, and you still sat there and mocked me." "Don't be dramatic," he scoffed. "It was a joke." I felt something snap inside me. No, it wasn't. It was never a joke. None of it. You hate that I made something of myself without your help. You hate that I don't need you. And you really hate that you need me. His silence told me I'd hit a nerve. So I kept going. I'm done. No more money. No more help. You think I'm a joke? Fine. Go ahead and laugh. But you won't be laughing when the bills start piling up and I'm not there to bail you out. His tone turned cold. You'd really turn your back on your family over this? I let out a breath, shaking my head. You turned your back on me a long time ago. He was quiet for a long moment. Then, in a slow, warning tone, he said, You don't want to do this, James. I almost laughed. Even now, he thought he could intimidate me, bully me into falling back in line. But he didn't realize he had already lost. This conversation is over, I said simply. And before he could say another word, I hung up. I sat there for a moment, the weight of what I'd done settling in. The ties had been cut. For the first time in my life, I wasn't responsible for them. And for the first time in my life, I felt free. But I knew them. This wasn't over. They weren't going to let me go that easily. The next evening, just as the sun was dipping behind the skyline, I heard a knock at my door. The kind of knock that makes your stomach tighten because you know something's off. It wasn't a friendly tap or a casual visitor. It was more like an impatient, urgent thud, like whoever was on the other side had something to prove. I stood still for a moment, staring at the door. I already knew who it was. I didn't even need to check the peephole. I could feel the tension in the air, the anticipation building up like a storm. They weren't going to let this go. I could already picture their faces, the guilt tripping, the anger. They weren't used to being ignored, especially not by me. I had always been the one to give in, to swallow my frustration and let it slide. But not anymore. I opened the door. There they were, my mom, my dad, and even Mark, standing in front of my apartment, looking like they had just come from a funeral. My dad was frowning, arms crossed, looking like he'd just stepped off the set of some low-budget mob movie. My mom was trying to look casual, but I could see the tightness in her posture, the way her fingers twitched at her side. And Mark, he was just there, standing in the back, arms crossed too, trying to look tough but clearly uncomfortable with the situation. James, my dad started, his voice dripping with false calm. Can we talk? I didn't even try to hide the irritation in my voice. What do you want? Mom stepped forward, her expression softer than my dad's. We came here because we need to clear things up. This has gone too far. I raised an eyebrow. Really? You want to clear things up? After that video? After years of pretending like you don't rely on me, that I'm some kind of embarrassment to you? We didn't mean it like that, she said, holding up her hands, her voice all saccharine sweetness. It was just a joke, honey. You're taking this way too seriously. You're overreacting. I clenched my fists at my sides. Overreacting? No, I'm done. For years, I've been paying for your bills, making sure you're comfortable, and you're still mocking me, mocking my career, my life. And when I finally stand up for myself, you come knocking at my door like nothing happened. My dad cut in, his voice growing louder now, with a touch of that familiar venom. You're acting like we're the problem here. Maybe you're the one who's got it all wrong. Maybe it's you who needs to grow up and stop being so sensitive about everything. I could feel my heart rate pick up. You really don't get it, do you? For once in my life, I'm not going to let you walk all over me. I've been carrying you, and I'm done. Mark, who had stayed mostly silent up until now, chimed in, his tone snide and mocking. Oh, come on, James. Are you really going to act like you're some kind of hero? You're just trying to play the victim because we're calling you out. My blood boiled. The last few years, I'd been the one saving their asses, working myself into the ground while they lived comfortably off my back. And now Mark, who barely even had a job, was lecturing me? Don't talk to me, Mark, I snapped, stepping forward, the heat of anger rising in my chest. You don't have the right to say a damn thing. You've been riding on my coattails since the day you turned 18, and now you've got the nerve to act like I'm the one in the wrong? You're all just mad because I'm no longer letting you treat me like a personal ATM. My dad's eyes hardened, the anger finally surfacing. You're crossing a line, James. Do you really think you can just walk away from your family like this? You'll regret it. We've always been there for you, and now you think you can just cut us off. I took a step back, my voice getting louder. No, you've never been there for me. You've been there to take. That's it. You've never supported me, not once. Every single thing I've achieved, I've done by myself, and I'm done pretending like I owe you anything for it. You don't get to humiliate me and then act like the victim when I finally stand up for myself. Mark started to speak again, but my dad held up a hand to silence him. He was glaring at me now, his eyes full of anger and something else I couldn't quite place. Something dangerous. You really think you can just cut us off, James? Fine. Go ahead. But don't think for a second that we won't find a way to make you pay for this. That hit me like a slap to the face. Make me pay? You really think you have that power over me anymore? I could feel the tension in the air, thick and suffocating. My mom was looking between us, her hands trembling slightly, but she didn't speak. It was like everyone had just collectively realized that things had gone too far, and they didn't know how to pull it back. I didn't wait for them to say anything else. I'm done. Don't come back here. Don't call me. Don't ask for anything. I'm not your bank anymore, and I'm not your punching bag. Get out of my life. For a moment, no one moved. It was like time itself had frozen, and the only sound was the faint hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. Then, slowly, my dad shook his head. You'll regret this, James. But I didn't care anymore. Goodbye, I said firmly, closing the door in their faces. As soon as the door clicked shut, the silence in my apartment was almost deafening. It felt like a weight had been lifted from my chest, like I could finally breathe without the constant pressure of their expectations and manipulations hanging over me. For the first time in years, I felt like I was in control of my own life. Since that night, I haven't heard from any of them. I blocked their numbers, deleted their emails, and made it clear to a few mutual acquaintances that I wanted nothing to do with them. But I know they're still out there, plotting something, waiting for me to crack and reach out. Maybe they'll come knocking again, maybe not. I've been working even harder now, focusing on my business, which has been growing steadily without all the toxic noise. I don't feel guilty anymore when I look at my bank account or at my achievements. But every now and then, I wonder if I did the right thing, if I'm being too harsh, too unforgiving. Anyway, I've made my peace with it. But I'd love to hear your thoughts. Was I wrong to cut them off completely? Do you think I should have tried to work things out? What would you have done in my shoes? Let me know in the comments. When the bride pointed me toward the trash bins, I finally understood my place in their perfect little love story. I'm Evan, 32, and if you'd asked me last year how I felt about my younger brother getting married, I'd have said I was happy for him. Genuinely. Jeremy and I weren't close, never had been, but we coexisted peacefully. We were those siblings who shared a roof growing up, but not much else. He was loud, brash, constantly surrounded by friends or drama. I was quiet, a bit reserved, always more comfortable listening than talking. Still, I always showed up for him when it mattered. Birthdays, college move-in, even those messy breakups where he'd call me slurring his words at 3 a.m. I'd answer. I'd come. I always came. So when the wedding invitation arrived, I RSVP'd yes without a second thought. It felt like a given. I was his only brother, after all. I should have noticed the signs. The invite said, Evan plus guest, but there was no call, no message, no, hey man, can't wait to see you there. When I texted him to ask what the dress code was, just a casual question, he replied 2 days later with a thumbs up emoji. That was it. No see you soon, no details. I chalked it up to stress. Weddings are chaos. Maybe he was overwhelmed. That's what I told myself, because the alternative, that he didn't care if I came or not, wasn't something I was ready to consider. The day of the wedding was bright and hot, the kind of late summer afternoon where everything feels loud. I drove 2 hours to the venue, a fancy vineyard I'd never heard of but immediately realized was the kind of place that cost a small fortune just to breathe on. Rows of white chairs faced a flower-drenched altar, and everything smelled like fresh roses and money. I'd brought a gift, an envelope with a generous check, more than I probably should have given, but again, it felt like a given. Jeremy was family. You show up, you support, you give. I walked up to the welcome table and smiled at the girl behind the clipboard. She scanned the list, frowned slightly, then scribbled something on a post-it before glancing up. Just you, right? I nodded, a little thrown off by her tone. Yeah, Evan. She pointed vaguely toward the far side of the seating area. We're pretty full, but there's some standing room by the hedge. She said it like she was offering me a privilege. I blinked. There's no seat for me? She shrugged. Sorry. Bride's side did some last-minute adjustments. Last-minute adjustments. Like I was luggage that didn't make it onto the plane. I stood there for a second, dumbfounded. I scanned the rows. I saw cousins. Old high school friends. A guy Jeremy used to play Call of Duty with in college. Even the hairstylist was there, fanning herself and chatting with someone who looked like the officiant. But no seat for me. I swallowed it. I told myself not to make a scene. It was his day, not mine. I started walking toward the hedge when I heard her voice, sharp, nasal, a little too theatrical. "Oh, you can stand by the trash," she said, pointing behind her without looking at me. "We're out of seats." It was Paige, the bride. We'd met 3 times. Once over lunch, once at a family barbecue, and once when I helped Jeremy move apartments and she barely acknowledged me. Each interaction left me with the same impression. Paige was pretty, polished, and profoundly uninterested in anyone who couldn't serve a function in her social climbing. At first, I thought she was joking, but when I laughed, her face didn't change. "I mean, seriously," she added, waving a hand like she was dismissing a waiter. "There's a spot near the bins. You'll be fine." I looked around. People were watching. Some awkwardly looked away. No one spoke up, not even Jeremy. I saw him a few feet away, adjusting his tie and talking to one of Paige's uncles. He glanced at me, gave a tight smile, and then went right back to his conversation. Like this was normal. Like it was okay. Like I wasn't the guy who helped him pay off a credit card bill last year when Paige's ring accidentally went on his emergency fund. And that's when something clicked. Not anger. Not even sadness. Just clarity. I looked at the gift in my hand, an envelope with a 4-digit check and a handwritten note wishing them happiness, and I realized exactly what I was to them. A wallet. A placeholder. Background noise. I turned to Paige and smiled. "Fitting," I said, nodding toward the bins. "Since that's where this marriage belongs." I don't remember if she said anything back. Maybe she gasped. Maybe she didn't. I just turned around, walked toward the parking lot, and felt the weight of something lift off my shoulders. That's when I heard footsteps behind me, fast, uneven. "Evan, wait." "Jeremy." I kept walking. And just as I reached the car door, he caught up. "Seriously? You're gonna make a scene," he said, out of breath and red in the face. "This is my wedding, dude." I looked at him, really looked at him, and I realized I didn't recognize him anymore. I didn't say a word. He stood there, breathing hard, like I had just punched him in the gut. Like he was the one who'd just been shoved aside like last week's recycling. "Look," he said, glancing nervously back toward the venue. "You're being dramatic." Paige didn't mean anything by it. I raised an eyebrow. "She told me to stand by the trash, Jeremy." He rubbed the back of his neck. "Okay, yeah, that was not great. But it's her big day. She's stressed. You know how she gets when things don't go exactly right. That right there? That little line? It hit me harder than I expected. You know how she gets." Like he'd rehearsed this excuse before. Like there had been other moments, maybe smaller ones, maybe worse, and he'd brushed them off with the same sentence. He wasn't defending me. He was managing me. Like I was another potential PR disaster on his carefully curated wedding day. I opened the car door, slipped the envelope back into my pocket, and took one long breath. You didn't even notice I didn't have a seat. Jeremy's mouth opened. Closed. "I thought you'd find one." I laughed once. "Cold. Even the DJ's assistant got a seat, man. Your fiancé's lash technician got one. But not your brother." He looked away. His silence was all the confirmation I needed. "She said she wanted a small ceremony," he muttered. "But not too small for 20 of her friends I've never met?" I said. "Let's be honest, this wasn't an accident. This was calculated." He didn't deny it. And honestly, that hurt more than if he had. I shook my head and climbed into the car. I didn't slam the door. I didn't peel out. I just sat for a moment, letting the AC hum around me while I watched him standing there, still trying to decide if it was worth defending his bride or salvaging the last thread of decency left between us. Then he knocked. I rolled down the window halfway. "Look," he said, lowering his voice. "I'm sorry, all right? Paige, she's particular. And maybe she felt like you didn't support our relationship or—" I never said a word against her, I cut in. "That's the problem," he snapped. "You're always so quiet. So distant. You act like you're better than everyone." And there it was. Not just Paige. Not just a missing chair. This had been simmering for years, bubbling beneath every polite interaction and forced smile. I narrowed my eyes. "You think this is about me being quiet? Or is it about you needing people who clap loud enough to hear over your own doubts?" Jeremy took a step back like I'd slapped him. "Well, yeah," I said, gripping the wheel. "Well." I pulled out slowly, leaving him standing in the gravel like a man who wasn't sure whether he'd lost something or dodged a bullet. And I didn't look back. Not when I passed the rows of parked cars. Not when I saw Paige standing near the vineyard's entrance, lips tight, eyes narrowed, one hand on her hip like she'd already spun the narrative in her favor. But I did hear the faint ping of my phone as I drove away. Paige texted, "Disrespectful and immature. I hope you're proud of yourself." Mom texted, "Jeremy's crying." You couldn't have just kept the peace for one day? And Cheryl texted, "We all have to make sacrifices for love, Evan. Grow up." I muted the thread. I wasn't interested in playing damage control. Not this time. That night, I sat at my kitchen table, gift envelope in hand, wondering how many times I'd let myself be sidelined in the name of family unity. And what exactly that word, family, was supposed to mean when it only ran in one direction. I didn't want revenge. At least, not at first. But then I remembered something Jeremy probably forgot in all his wedding chaos. The condo. A one-bedroom they'd been renovating on weekends. The starter home Paige kept bragging about online. Jeremy didn't qualify for the mortgage on his own. His credit was a mess. But mine? Mine was clean, solid, dependable. So I'd co-signed 6 months ago. They needed me to close the deal. I never took my name off the deed. And that's when the idea began to take shape. Slow, deliberate, and cold. Because if I was just trash to them, then maybe it was time they learned what it felt like to lose something they thought they didn't need. I took one last sip of wine, opened my laptop, and pulled up the documents. And I smiled. That condo? It had a lot of value. The thing about being the quiet one in the family is that people forget you're watching. They mistake silence for passivity, like you're just floating through life without thoughts of your own. But quiet doesn't mean weak. It means I pick my battles. And this one? This was long overdue. The next morning, I took the day off work. Not because I was upset. Not anymore. That emotion had passed. What I felt now was purpose. Calm, clear, and steady. I brewed my coffee, clicked open the folder on my desktop marked property docs, and scrolled until I found what I needed, the co-ownership agreement for the condo Jeremy and Paige were remodeling. Back when Jeremy called me in a panic about losing their dream unit, when they needed just one more adult with clean credit to qualify for the mortgage, I was that guy. No hesitation. I'd been assured it was just on paper, that they'd take care of the payments, and once they refinanced in 6 months, my name would be removed. Well, it had been 7 months now, and I was still on the deed. I checked. Twice. To them, it was a formality. A signature from the dependable older brother. Something they could toss aside once the real adults took over. To me, it was leverage. At 11:03 a.m., I called the real estate attorney I'd worked with when I bought my own place. Nice guy. Discreet. Thorough. I explained the situation, asked what my options were, and waited. "You're listed as a co-owner, Evan," he confirmed. "That gives you considerable rights over the property. If you wanted to force a sale or reclaim occupancy, you could. Even if I haven't been living there?" I asked. "Doesn't matter," he replied. "Ownership is ownership." That was all I needed. I thanked him, hung up, and started drafting a letter. Not a legal notice, yet, but something polite. Formal. The kind of letter that makes your stomach drop by paragraph 3. I titled it, "Notice of Intent to Assume Full Occupancy." Then I paused, because I wanted this to land with precision. Not fury, not drama, just inevitability. I wanted Paige to read it with her morning latte and feel the same sharp flicker of humiliation I felt standing by those trash bins in a press suit with no seat and no voice. Around 3 p.m., I printed the letter, slid it into a clean envelope, and drove it to the condo. I didn't knock. They weren't home. Probably still recovering from the post-wedding festivities, tasting cakes, reviewing drone footage, pretending their seating chart hadn't turned a brother into a punchline. I slid the envelope through the mail slot. On the way back to my car, I took one last look at the condo. It really was a nice place. Mid-century exterior, plenty of light. I'd helped paint those walls, carried in that hideous couch Paige insisted on. She said it was boho chic. Jeremy didn't even know what that meant. I got in my car and drove away, feeling lighter than I had in months. 3 hours later, my phone buzzed. Jeremy texted, "What is this letter? Are you serious?" I didn't respond. A minute later, Jeremy texted, "You can't do this, man. Paige is freaking out. We just got married. This is the worst possible timing." I finally replied, "You should have thought of that before telling me to stand by the trash." Read. No reply. I imagined them in the living room, Paige waving the letter like it was radioactive, Jeremy pacing, mumbling, checking the internet for how to remove a co-owner from a deed. Probably Googling my name, wondering if I really meant it. If I'd go through with it. I smiled. Because I did. And I would. The next day, the real fun began. First came the email from Paige, long, rambling, laced with faux empathy and passive aggression. "Dear Evan, we're sorry for how things played out at the wedding." Emotions were high. I'd hoped we could start fresh as a family, but your recent actions have made that difficult. I'm not sure why you feel the need to escalate things, but Jeremy and I would appreciate a conversation to clarify everyone's intentions before lawyers get involved. Let's be adults about this. Paige. I didn't respond. The following week, I filed the initial paperwork to force a sale of the condo. My lawyer sent them the notification with my signature neatly printed at the bottom. Jeremy called that night. His voice was strained. No pretense. You're really doing this? He asked. Yes. He was quiet for a beat. Do you need the money or something? That made me laugh. No. I need the respect I've never gotten from you or your wife. I figure this is the closest I'll get. You're punishing me for one stupid seating mistake? No. I said. I'm reminding you that I'm not disposable. He tried to argue. Tried to guilt. Even pulled the, but we're family card. That one always came out when consequences hit. You made a choice, Jeremy, I said quietly. Now I'm making mine. And with that, I hung up. I wasn't expecting what came next. 3 days later, my mom showed up. At my door. Tired eyes. Tight lips. Holding a plastic container of lasagna like it could erase a decade of favoritism and neglect. We need to talk, she said. No hello. No apology. Just, we need to talk. I let her in. She sat stiffly on the edge of my couch, lasagna untouched in her lap. I heard you're trying to take the condo, she said, as if I'd stolen candy from a child. I own the condo, Mom. Half of it. She didn't blink. You know how much this means to Jeremy and Paige. Why are you doing this? That word again. Doing. Like I'd flipped the world upside down, not just stopped enabling it. Because you all taught me something, I said slowly. That being quiet gets you nothing but a view from the trash pile. So I'm trying something new. Mom pursed her lips. She was under stress. Weddings are complicated. So is being treated like an afterthought by your own blood. She didn't argue with that. She just stood, placed the lasagna on the counter, and said, I hope this is worth it. I walked her to the door. It already is, I said, and closed it gently behind her. I returned to the table, picked up my coffee, and watched the inbox light up again. Lawyers, mortgage officers, and, somewhere in between, Jeremy trying to find a compromise. But there wouldn't be one, because I wasn't done. And what I had planned next. That was the part they'd never see coming. The final email from their lawyer came in 2 weeks later, polished, direct, and with a faint air of desperation beneath the legalese. Our clients, Mr. Jeremy Carter and Mrs. Paige Carter, request that Mr. Evan Carter reconsider the forced sale and allow a voluntary buyout of his share. They are prepared to offer a lump sum of $15,000 as compensation in exchange for relinquishing any ownership or legal claim to the property in question. $15,000. I laughed. Out loud. Not because of the number, though. Yes, it was insultingly low, but because it was the perfect final act of arrogance wrapped in fake generosity. That condo was easily worth $500,000. The down payment alone had been $70,000. And now they wanted me to walk away for the price of a used car? Nope. I typed out a quick reply, CC'd my lawyer, and kept it simple. Offer declined. See you in mediation. Because I wasn't bluffing. I hadn't been bluffing from the moment I slid that envelope through their door. And for once in my life, I didn't care if it made me look bitter or petty. The truth was, I was bitter. But not over one wedding slight. It was years of being treated like a safety net, only unrolled when they needed something, then shoved back into the closet when they didn't. This was bigger than trash bins and seating charts. This was about every time I sat in silence so someone else could speak over me. The mediation happened a month later. A sleek office downtown, neutral walls, bad coffee. They both showed up looking tired. Paige didn't meet my eyes. Jeremy gave me a tight nod, the kind you give a stranger who might have once been important. The mediator, a kind-eyed woman in her 50s, started things off cordially. We're here to determine the most amicable path forward. Evan, since you initiated the action, would you like to start? I did. I passed her a copy of my proposal already prepared, already signed. I wasn't just selling my half of the condo. I was buying theirs. Silence. Paige's head snapped up. Excuse me. Jeremy leaned forward. You're offering to buy us out? I nodded. Full market value. I've had it appraised. I'll handle closing costs and all legal fees. You walk away with a clean check and no lien on your future. The mediator blinked in surprise. That's extremely generous. It was. And it wasn't about being generous. It was about being done. Jeremy leaned back, visibly thrown. Paige's eyes narrowed. This is some power play. You just want to evict us. No, I said calmly. I want to own what I already helped build. You can stay until the end of the month. 30 days. That's more grace than I got. They didn't respond. Just whispered to each other, lips tight, hands clenched. The mediator gave them time. After 10 minutes of hushed arguing and one dramatic sigh from Paige, Jeremy finally said, "We accept." And just like that, it was done. For weeks later, I had the keys. They were gone. No note. No goodbye. Just silence. The place was cleaner than I expected. A few leftover decorations still hung in the hallway, framed photos of their engagement shoot, all smiles and sunlight. I boxed them up, carefully, and left them at their new address, return label and all. I stood in the empty living room for a while, just breathing. The walls still held the faint scent of fresh paint. The same paint I'd helped roll on during that first renovation weekend, when Jeremy was excited and Paige pretended not to hate getting her hands dirty. I could still hear her complaints echoing in my head. This color looks cheap. Can we afford something more modern? I smiled. And then I opened the windows. Let the air sweep through. 2 weeks after the final papers cleared, I listed the condo for sale. I didn't want it. I never wanted it. What I wanted was control, respect, closure. And I got all three. The condo sold above asking. I made back my share and then some. More than the money, though, was the peace. I didn't hear from Jeremy again. Not directly, but I saw the posts. Passive-aggressive Instagram stories about fake family, and some people never grow up. Paige went on a podcast ranting about how jealous siblings ruin marriages. I didn't respond. I didn't comment. I just watched, sipped my coffee, and smiled. My mom texted once. Just one line. "I hope you're proud of what you did." I didn't reply. But if I had, I would have said, "I am." Because for the first time in my life, I didn't just show up. I didn't just take it. I chose me. A few months later, I moved into a new place, my own, paid for in full with the profit from the sale. No shared deeds. No cosigns. No Paige. No Jeremy. Just sunlight, quiet, and space that was entirely mine. I put up one framed photo in the living room. Not of family. Not of weddings. Just a landscape shot I took on a solo trip the week after everything ended, a mountain road in the distance, empty and open, winding towards something better. Every time I pass it, I remember that moment by the trash bins. And I smile. Because that was the day I stopped standing in the background and started building something for myself.